The courtroom was thick with tension, the air heavy as 18-year-old Emily Carter sat at the defense table, her arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on her lips. She glanced at her father across the room, the man she had poisoned, now hooked to an oxygen tube, his hands trembling from the ordeal. Months earlier, he had collapsed after sipping the coffee she prepared, his body racked by a toxin that nearly ended his life. Emily didn't flinch during questioning as she rolled her eyes at the evidence, whispering jokes to her lawyer as if the whole thing was beneath her. She thought her youth made her untouchable, that no one could prove her intent. But hidden in her phone was a search that would seal her fate, a late-night query for the perfect, undetectable poison. And when the judge read it aloud, that smirk would vanish for good. Stories like this remind us that justice always finds its way. If you believe in accountability, just subscribe now and tell us what you think below. This is how it all began. Before the courtroom drama, before the detectives pieced together the clues, before the poison ever touched that fateful cup of coffee, there was a quiet suburban home where trust ran deep. Mark Carter, a hard-working father of 46, had always prided himself on providing for his family, rising early each day to face the world with discipline and care. His daughter Emily, freshly turned 18, seemed like any other young woman navigating the challenges of growing up, balancing school, friends, and the occasional family disagreement. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Mark had discovered Emily's reckless spending, and a secret credit line opened in his name, leading to heated arguments that echoed through their once peaceful house. He warned her of consequences, threatening to cut off her access to funds and even suggesting she find her own way after high school. Emily seethed in silence, her resentment building like a storm. Little did Mark know, his words had ignited something darker in her heart, pushing her toward a decision that would shatter their family forever. As the days passed, Emily's late-night online searches hinted at a plan taking shape, one that involved something subtle, something deadly, hidden in plain sight. The morning it all unfolded started like any other, with Mark heading to the kitchen for his routine coffee, and unaware that the hand offering it held betrayal. Chapter 1. The Smirk in the Courtroom. Mark Carter's footsteps echoed softly on the tiled kitchen floor that fateful morning, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air as he prepared for another day at the construction site. He was a man of habit, rising with the sun to tackle the demands of his job, always ensuring his family had what they needed. At 46, Mark had built a life of stability in their quiet suburban neighborhood, where houses lined the streets like sentinels of normalcy. His wife, Sarah, was still asleep upstairs, and his daughter Emily, usually lost in the world of teenage dreams until midday, surprised him by being up and about. She stood by the counter, her back to him, stirring something into a mug with a casual grace that seemed out of place for the hour. "Morning, Dad," she said, turning with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, handing him the steaming cup. Mark chuckled, touched by what he assumed was a rare gesture of thoughtfulness from his 18-year-old. He took a sip, the bitter warmth comforting as always, never suspecting that this simple act of trust would soon unravel everything he knew. As he chatted briefly about her school plans, Emily nodded along, her mind elsewhere, already calculating the moments ahead. Little did he know, and the liquid in that mug carried a hidden danger, a substance carefully chosen to disrupt his world without leaving obvious traces. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows that hinted at the darkness to come, as Mark finished his coffee and grabbed his keys, stepping out into the crisp air, oblivious to the betrayal brewing behind him. As Mark drove away, the effects began subtly at first, a slight tremor in his hands on the steering wheel, a blur at the edges of his vision that he dismissed as fatigue from a long week. He was known among his colleagues as the reliable one, the father who balanced work and home with unyielding dedication, often sharing stories of Emily's achievements over lunch breaks. But back at the house, Emily watched from the window, her expression calm, almost detached, as if observing a scene from a distant play. She had spent weeks building up to this moment, on her resentment toward her father's strict rules festering like an untreated wound. The arguments had escalated recently, with Mark discovering her secret spending habits and the unauthorized credit line she had opened, using his personal details in a bid for independence. "You're ruining my future," she had shouted during one heated exchange, her voice echoing through the halls. But Mark had stood firm, believing tough love would guide her toward responsibility. Now, as the minutes ticked by, Emily busied herself with her phone, scrolling through messages that would later become key pieces in a puzzle investigators would assemble. The neighborhood remained peaceful, birds chirping in the trees, unaware of the quiet storm unfolding. Mark's car swerved slightly on the road, his heart beginning to race irregularly, a sign that the toxin was taking hold, mimicking symptoms of a natural ailment to avoid suspicion. He pulled over, clutching his chest, or the world spinning as he fumbled for his phone to call for help. Neighbors, seeing his distress, rushed to his side, their concerned faces a blur as paramedics arrived, sirens piercing the morning calm. In the hospital emergency room, the atmosphere was a whirlwind of urgency, doctors and nurses moving with practiced efficiency as they hooked Mark up to monitors, his vital signs fluctuating wildly. Sarah arrived in a panic, her face pale with worry, holding his hand as he struggled to breathe, the oxygen mask fogging with each labored inhale. "What happened?" she whispered, her mind racing through possibilities, perhaps a sudden illness or an accident at work. But the medical team suspected something more sinister from the start. Toxicology tests were ordered immediately, the lab technicians working swiftly to analyze blood samples for any anomalies. Meanwhile, Emily received the call from her mother and made her way to the hospital. Her demeanor strikingly composed for someone whose father was fighting for his life. She sat in the waiting area texting friends about the family emergency, her words casual, as if describing a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering event. Detectives would later note this odd tranquility, a clue to the psychological layers beneath her surface. As hours passed, the initial results came back, revealing traces of a synthetic compound not commonly found in everyday environments, or one that could cause severe internal disruption if ingested. The doctors stabilized Mark, but the road to recovery would be long, his body weakened by the assault on his system. Sarah wept quietly, questioning how such a thing could happen in their safe home, while Emily offered vague comforts, her eyes betraying no guilt, only a quiet confidence that she had covered her tracks well. The investigation ignited almost immediately, with Detective Laura Mitchell assigned to the case, her sharp instincts honed from years of unraveling domestic mysteries. She arrived at the hospital, notebook in hand, interviewing Sarah first, who recounted the morning's routine with tearful detail: the coffee, Mark's departure, the sudden collapse. "Emily made the coffee today," Sarah mentioned offhandedly, not yet connecting the dots, but it was enough to pique Mitchell's interest. The detective then spoke with Emily, who answered questions with a shrug and a half-smile, claiming she had just wanted to do something nice for her dad. "He's always so busy," she said, her tone light, almost playful, as if the situation was a mere misunderstanding. Mitchell noted the lack of emotion, the way Emily avoided direct eye contact, behaviors that often signaled deeper involvement. Back at the Carter home, a search team combed through the kitchen, bagging the coffee mug for analysis, its interior revealing faint residues that would test positive for the same compound found in Mark's blood. The substance was identified as a pesticide derivative, potent and restricted, not something accidentally spilled into a drink. Questions swirled. How had it entered the home? Who had access? The answers pointed increasingly toward Emily, but building a case required more than suspicion. It demanded irrefutable links. As the sun set on that chaotic day, Mitchell reviewed the preliminary reports, her mind piecing together a timeline that began with family tensions and led to this calculated act. Emily's life before that morning painted a picture of a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, navigating the complexities of independence with a mix of rebellion and charm. Friends described her as outgoing, always the center of social gatherings, posting vibrant photos online that showcased a carefree existence. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks had formed, particularly in her relationship with Mark, who expected excellence and accountability from his only child. He had supported her through school, funding extracurriculars, and even a car for her 18th birthday, but recent discoveries of her financial missteps had strained their bond. "I just want what's best for you," Mark had said during one confrontation, his voice firm but caring, unaware that his words fueled a growing sense of entrapment in Emily. She confided in close friends about feeling controlled, her messages laced with frustration that escalated over time. Investigators would later subpoena those digital trails, uncovering a pattern of searches that revealed a mind turning toward desperate solutions. But in the immediate aftermath, as Mark lay in his hospital bed, Emily maintained her facade, visiting him with feigned concern, asking doctors questions that seemed innocent but hinted at curiosity about detection methods. The family home, once a haven, now felt shadowed by doubt, with Sarah beginning to question the dynamics she had overlooked. As the days turned into a week, Mark's condition improved slowly, his body fighting off the effects of the toxin through intensive treatment and rest. He recounted his memories to Detective Mitchell from his hospital bed, his voice weak but determined, describing the coffee's unusual aftertaste that he had brushed aside. Emily was trying to help, he said. I'm still clinging to the belief in his daughter's innocence, a father's love blinding him to the possibilities. Mitchell listened carefully, noting the details, then shifted the conversation to family dynamics, learning about the recent arguments over money and independence. Meanwhile, Emily returned to school, acting as if life continued normally, laughing with friends and avoiding deeper discussions about her father's health. But whispers spread, and some classmates noticed her unusual calm, one even recalling a joke she made about family problems solving themselves. The detective delved deeper, requesting warrants for Emily's electronic devices, suspecting that the key to the puzzle lay in the digital realm. What emerged was a series of late-night queries, each more incriminating than the last, painting a portrait of premeditation that contrasted sharply with Emily's youthful exterior. The neighborhood buzzed with speculation, neighbors sharing hushed conversations over fences, a shock that such deception could lurk in their midst. The courtroom would later become the stage where all these threads converged, but in those early moments of investigation, the focus remained on gathering evidence without alerting Emily to the tightening net. Detective Mitchell coordinated with forensic experts who analyzed the mug's residue under microscopes, confirming the presence of the pesticide in concentrations designed to harm without immediate fatality. This wasn't a random accident. It was deliberate, requiring knowledge and access that only someone close could have. Sarah, torn between loyalty to her husband and daughter, provided keys to the house for further searches, her heart heavy with the weight of potential betrayal. Inside, investigators found no obvious hiding spots for the substance, but a thorough sweep of Emily's room revealed deleted browser histories that tech specialists recovered with ease. The searches, substances that cause heart issues without trace, quick effects of certain chemicals, aligned perfectly with the timeline, sending chills through the team. Emily, sensing the scrutiny, began to withdraw, spending more time alone, her smirk returning in private as she convinced herself that youth and cleverness would shield her. But the evidence mounted, each piece a brick in the wall of justice, closing in. By the time the case progressed to formal charges, the smirk that defined Emily's courtroom presence had become legendary in local news reports, a symbol of perceived arrogance that fueled public outrage. Reporters gathered outside the precinct as she was brought in for questioning, her head held high, answering with deflections that only deepened suspicions. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said to Mitchell, her voice steady, but the detective saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes. Psychological evaluations were ordered, revealing traits of entitlement and a lack of remorse that experts linked to deeper issues. Mark, recovering at home now, grappled with the emerging truth, his trust shattered as he replayed memories of that morning. The family gatherings, the shared meals, all tainted by the revelation. Sarah supported him through therapy sessions where they discussed the pain of parental betrayal, seeking ways to heal even as the legal process loomed. Emily's friends were interviewed, some providing messages that showed her venting about getting free from her father's control, words that now carried ominous weight. The investigation expanded, tracing the source of the toxin to an online purchase, the package's delivery captured on a neighbor's camera, linking it undeniably to Emily. The tension in the Carter household reached a boiling point as the arrest warrant was prepared, with Emily continuing her daily routine, oblivious to the surveillance teams monitoring her movements. She attended classes, met with friends, and even posted upbeat updates online, her digital facade masking the storm. But inside, doubts crept in, moments of anxiety where she double-checked her deletions, unaware that data recovery tools had already exposed her. Detective Mitchell, piecing together the motive, financial freedom, escape from rules, felt a mix of pity and resolve for the young woman who had chosen such a path. When the arrest came, officers knocked politely, Emily opening the door with surprise that quickly turned to that familiar smirk. "This is ridiculous," she said, as handcuffs clicked into place, her voice laced with defiance. Transported to the station, she sat in the interrogation room, arms folded, repeating denials even as evidence was laid out before her. The phone searches, the vial remnants, the timelines, all irrefutable. Yet her confidence held, believing her age would garner sympathy, yet that the system favored the young and seemingly innocent. As pre-trial proceedings began, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation, Emily seated at the defense table, her expression a mask of boredom that infuriated onlookers. The judge, a seasoned veteran of such cases, observed her closely, noting the whispers to her lawyer, the occasional grin that seemed out of place in the solemn setting. Prosecutors outlined the case, a planned act of harm driven by resentment, and supported by digital footprints and physical evidence. The defense countered with claims of coincidence, suggesting environmental contamination, but the jury's faces showed skepticism. Mark testified from the stand, his voice breaking as he described the trust he had placed in his daughter, the coffee that nearly ended his life. Tears filled the room, empathy swelling for the victim who had only sought to guide his child. Emily watched impassively, her smirk fading only when her own words were read aloud, texts about revenge, searches for toxins. The impact was palpable, the room growing silent as the weight of betrayal settled over everyone. The evidence montage continued, experts explaining the science behind the substance, how it disrupted bodily functions subtly, designed to evade initial detection. Shipping records were presented, the false name on the order tracing back to Emily's IP address, a digital breadcrumb she hadn't erased. Jurors nodded, connecting the dots, while Emily shifted in her seat, the reality sinking in. Her lawyer objected, but the judge overruled, allowing the full picture to emerge. Friends took the stand, recounting conversations where Emily expressed frustration, one even quoting her saying, "Life would be better without his rules." The psychological report was introduced, highlighting patterns of manipulation and a belief in her own invulnerability. As the chapter of testimony closed, the courtroom air thickened with anticipation for the verdict, Emily's initial arrogance crumbling under the barrage of proof. In quieter moments between sessions, Mark reflected on the family photos lining their home, memories of happier times when Emily's laughter filled the rooms. He wondered where things had gone wrong, if his strictness had pushed her too far, but counselors assured him the choice was hers alone. Sarah stood by him, their marriage tested but enduring, and finding strength in community support. Emily and Holding made calls to friends, her tone still light, but cracks appeared, questions about possible outcomes, hints of fear beneath the bravado. The media frenzy grew, headlines capturing the untouchable teen narrative, sparking debates on youth accountability. Detective Mitchell wrapped up her reports, satisfied that justice was on course, the small detail of that 2:13 a.m. search proving pivotal. As the trial neared its end, the smirk that had defined Emily's entrance was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a tense stare as closing arguments echoed. Prosecutors emphasized the planning, the lack of regret, urging the jury to see beyond her age. The defense pleaded for mercy, painting her as a misguided youth, but the evidence spoke louder. Deliberations began, the courtroom emptying, leaving Emily to contemplate the path that led here, from a quiet kitchen to this moment of reckoning. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts, the word hanging in the air like a final judgment. Emily's face paled, the untouchable aura shattered. Mark closed his eyes, a mix of sorrow and relief washing over him. The judge scheduled sentencing, but not before allowing victim statements, setting the stage for emotional closure. In the days following, the case became a cautionary tale discussed in homes and online forums, prompting reflections on family bonds and the consequences of unchecked resentment. While Emily awaited her fate, the weight of 85 years looming, a stark reminder that no one is truly untouchable. The gavel's echo marked the end of the chapter, Justice's voice resounding as the smirk finally disappeared into the annals of a story that gripped the nation. Chapter 2. The Father Who Trusted Too Much. The echoes of the courtroom faded into memory as the story shifted back to the quiet rhythms of the Carter family's life, long before the poison ever tainted that morning coffee. But in a peaceful suburban neighborhood where lawns were meticulously trimmed and children played freely in the streets, Mark Carter had carved out a stable existence for his loved ones. At 46, he was the epitome of reliability. A construction manager who rose before dawn, his days filled with blueprints and team meetings that demanded precision and hard work. Neighbors often praised him as the kind of man who helped with community events, always ready with a friendly wave or a tool to lend. His home, a modest 2-story house with a welcoming porch, stood as a testament to his dedication, a place where family gatherings brought warmth and laughter. Mark's wife, Sarah, complemented his steadfast nature with her gentle nurturing, working part-time as a teacher while managing the household with quiet efficiency. Together they had raised Emily, their only child, instilling values of responsibility and kindness from an early age. But as Emily entered her teenage years, subtle shifts began to emerge, testing the bonds that once seemed unbreakable. Mark trusted deeply, believing that open communication could resolve any issue, never imagining that his protective instincts might one day be turned against him in the most unforeseen way. Emily, now 18, navigated the complexities of young adulthood with a mix of outward confidence and hidden frustrations. To the outside world, she appeared as a typical high school senior, active on social media, and sharing snapshots of weekend outings and school events, her feed a colorful mosaic of smiles and friendships. She excelled in art classes, often sketching intricate designs that hinted at a creative spirit, and her friends admired her quick wit and adventurous nature. Yet, within the walls of the Carter home, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Mark had always been strict about rules, setting curfews and expecting strong academic performance, viewing these as pathways to a successful future. He provided for Emily generously, from dance lessons in her younger years to the smartphone she cherished. But he drew lines when it came to extravagance. Recently, those lines had become battlegrounds. Emily's grades had slipped amid distractions, like late-night parties and a growing circle of friends who encouraged more rebellious pursuits. Mark noticed the changes, confronting her about skipped classes and unexplained absences, his voice firm but laced with concern. "I just want you to have the best opportunities," he'd say, hoping his guidance would steer her back on track. Emily, feeling the weight of expectations, often retreated to her room, scrolling through her phone in solitude, her resentment quietly building like clouds before a storm. The family's daily routines masked the growing divide, with mornings like any other in their cozy kitchen where sunlight streamed through lace curtains. Mark would prepare his coffee, strong and black, and a ritual that kick-started his demanding days on construction sites, where he oversaw projects that shaped the community's skyline. Sarah busied herself with packing lunches or planning lessons, her optimism a steady anchor for the household. Emily, when she joined them, brought a youthful energy, chatting about school projects or weekend plans, her laughter occasionally filling the space. But beneath these moments of normalcy, cracks were forming. Mark had discovered unusual charges on the family credit card, online purchases for clothes, gadgets, and event tickets that far exceeded Emily's allowance. When he questioned her, the conversation escalated into arguments that left the air thick with unspoken hurts. "You're treating me like a child," Emily would retort, her eyes flashing with defiance, while Mark countered that responsibility came with maturity. He decided to monitor her spending more closely, even threatening to restrict her access to funds until she showed improvement. These confrontations, though meant to teach, only deepened Emily's sense of confinement, pushing her to seek ways to assert control in subtle, hidden manners. As weeks passed, the neighborhood remained oblivious to the internal strife, with summer barbecues and block parties painting a picture of idyllic suburban life. Mark threw himself into his work, leading teams through challenging builds, his reputation for fairness earning him respect among colleagues. He often shared stories of Emily's artistic talents during breaks, pride evident in his tone, dreaming of her pursuing a creative career. Sarah, sensing the strain, tried to mediate, suggesting family outings to rebuild connections, like picnics in the local park where they could talk openly. Yet Emily's responses grew more distant, her time increasingly spent with friends who validated her frustrations. One evening, after a particularly heated discussion about her slipping grades, Mark sat her down for a serious talk. "If things don't change, we might need to consider tougher steps, like you finding a job after graduation," he said, his words intended as motivation, but landing like restrictions. Emily nodded silently, but inside, anger simmered. That night, alone in her room, she began exploring online forums, her searches innocuous at first, tips on independence, ways to manage finances, but gradually shifting toward more desperate queries that hinted at a mind grappling with escape. Friends later reflected on Emily's changing demeanor, recalling how she confided in them about feeling trapped by her father's expectations. "He thinks he knows everything," she'd text late at night, her messages laced with exasperation, seeking sympathy from those who understood the push-pull of teenage life. One close friend remembered a conversation at a coffee shop, where Emily vented about the credit card fallout, joking lightly about wishing for more freedom. The group laughed it off, assuming it was typical adolescent venting, not realizing the depth of her discontent. Back home, Mark and Sarah noticed Emily's withdrawal, attributing it to the stresses of senior year, college applications, peer pressures, and the looming transition to adulthood. They encouraged her to open up, even suggesting counseling. But Emily brushed it aside with assurances that everything was fine. In reality, her online activity told a different story, with browser histories revealing interests in quick solutions to personal conflicts, subjects that skirted the edges of acceptability. The family's trust, once a sturdy foundation, began to erode subtly, like sand shifting underfoot, as Emily's secret resentments took root. The Carter home, with its warm lighting and family photos adorning the walls, unheld memories of better times, vacations to the beach, holiday celebrations where Emily's artwork was proudly displayed. Mark cherished these snapshots, often reminiscing about teaching her to ride a bike or helping with school projects, his role as protector central to his identity. Yet the recent discoveries about the secret credit line had shaken him, revealing a side of Emily he hadn't anticipated. He confronted her gently at first, showing the statements, hoping for honesty. "This isn't like you," he said, disappointment etching his features, but Emily's defenses rose, claiming it was a mistake or a one-time lapse. The argument that followed was one of their worst, voices raised as Mark insisted on accountability, freezing her access to shared accounts. Sarah mediated, urging calm, but the damage lingered, with Emily storming off to her room, slamming the door. In the quiet that followed, Mark worried about her future, confiding in Sarah that he feared losing her to poor choices. Little did he know, this pivotal moment had ignited a spark in Emily, leading her to consider paths far removed from reconciliation. As the school year progressed, Emily maintained her social facade, attending classes and events with apparent enthusiasm, her grades stabilizing just enough to avoid further scrutiny. Teachers noted her creativity in assignments, praising her for thoughtful essays on personal growth, ironic given the turmoil at home. Friends invited her to gatherings where she laughed and danced, momentarily escaping the pressures. But in private, her thoughts turned inward, replaying the confrontations with Mark, each memory amplifying her sense of injustice. One text to a friend stood out in hindsight. "Once I'm out from under his thumb, things will be so much better." It seemed harmless then, a common complaint among peers, but it carried an undercurrent of finality. Mark, meanwhile, focused on mending fences, surprising Emily with small gestures like her favorite takeout or offers to help with college essays. His trust in her inherent goodness, unwavering. Sarah organized family dinners, hoping to foster dialogue, but Emily's participation was perfunctory, her mind elsewhere. The neighborhood's serene atmosphere belied the brewing storm, with autumn leaves falling like gentle reminders of change. Mark's workdays grew busier with a major project, leaving less time for home matters, but he made efforts to connect, asking about Emily's day over evening meals. She responded with brief updates, masking her growing detachment. Sarah sensed the shift, discussing it with Mark in hushed tones after Emily went to bed, wondering if external influences were at play. They considered family therapy again, but Emily resisted, insisting she was handling things. Unbeknownst to them, her late-night online explorations had evolved, on delving into topics that promised anonymity and quick resolutions to conflicts. The searches were careful, deleted promptly, but they marked a turning point, a quiet descent into planning that contrasted sharply with the family's outward harmony. Tensions peaked during a weekend when Mark reviewed the latest bank statements, discovering more unauthorized charges linked to Emily's activities. The confrontation was inevitable, unfolding in the living room with Sarah as witness. "This has to stop," Mark said firmly, outlining consequences like reduced privileges. Emily's response was heated, accusing him of over-controlling her life, tears mixing with anger as she stormed out. That night, alone, her searches intensified, focusing on substances that could alter situations subtly without detection. Friends received vague messages about her frustrations, but none suspected the depth. Mark, regretting the harshness, planned to apologize, his trust still intact, all believing in second chances. As days blended into weeks, the Carter family navigated a fragile peace, with Mark immersing in work and Sarah in her teaching, while Emily plotted in secrecy. The home's warmth persisted, but an undercurrent of unease grew, foreshadowing the morning that would change everything. Mark's routine coffee became a symbol of his unwavering faith, a simple act soon to be tainted by betrayal. Emily's resentment, fueled by perceived injustices, led her to online resources that offered invisible solutions, her actions veiled in the normalcy of teenage rebellion. The neighborhood remained a backdrop of calm, unaware of the gathering clouds. Mark reflected on his parenting, questioning if his strictness had pushed too far, but his love remained, hoping for reconciliation. Sarah supported him, their partnership a beacon amid uncertainty. The pivotal text to a friend, "Everything will be easier once I'm free," hung like a shadow, its meaning shifting in retrospect. Investigators would later trace these digital breadcrumbs, but in the moment, the family teetered on the edge, trust hanging by a thread. The calm before the tragedy settled, with Mark's morning rituals continuing, oblivious to the danger lurking in his own home. As the chapter closed on this prelude, the weight of unspoken conflicts lingered, setting the stage for the irreversible act that followed. To Chapter 3. The morning of the coffee. The first rays of dawn filtered through the kitchen curtains on that ordinary Tuesday, casting a soft glow over the Carter home, where routines had long been the backbone of daily life. Mark Carter stirred from sleep at his usual 6 a.m., the alarm's gentle beep pulling him into another day of responsibility. He moved with the quiet efficiency of habit, slipping into his work clothes and heading downstairs, yet the house still wrapped in the hush of early morning. Sarah remained in bed, catching a few more moments of rest before her own day began, while Emily's room upstairs showed no signs of activity. Or so it seemed. Mark entered the kitchen, flipping on the light and reaching for the coffee pot, expecting the solitude he cherished for gathering his thoughts. But today was different. A subtle shift hung in the air, unnoticed at first, as he heard soft footsteps approaching from the hallway. Our Emily appeared, her hair tousled from what looked like a recent awakening, a rare sight for someone who typically slept in. She offered a small smile, moving toward the counter with an air of casual helpfulness that caught Mark off guard. "Let me handle the coffee today, Dad," she said, her voice light and unexpected, as if testing a new role in their familiar dynamic. Mark raised an eyebrow, chuckling at the gesture, his trust in her unwavering despite recent tensions. As Emily busied herself with the coffee maker, measuring grounds and pouring water, Mark leaned against the counter, sharing a few words about the weather and his upcoming workday. The aroma of brewing coffee filled the space, a comforting scent that had always signaled the start of something productive. He appreciated this moment of connection, seeing it as a possible turning point after their arguments, a sign that Emily was stepping up. She handed him the mug, steam rising in gentle curls, her eyes meeting his with what seemed like genuine warmth. Mark took a sip, the hot liquid invigorating as always, and continued chatting about her school plans, encouraging her to focus on her strengths. Emily nodded along, responding with brief affirmations, her demeanor calm and composed, belying any inner turmoil. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking the minutes as Mark finished his drink, grabbing his lunch from the fridge and preparing to head out. He gave Emily a quick hug. Thanking her for the thoughtful start to his day, his heart light with hope for better times ahead. Stepping into the crisp morning air, he climbed into his truck, the engine humming to life as he pulled out of the driveway, the neighborhood awakening around him with the sounds of distant birds and starting cars. The drive to work began routinely, Mark navigating the familiar streets with ease, his mind drifting to project details and team assignments. But soon, subtle changes crept in. A faint tremor in his hands on the wheel, a slight haze clouding his vision that he attributed to the early hour, or perhaps needing more rest. He shook it off, focusing on the road, determined not to let minor discomforts derail his day. Back at home, Emily watched from the window, her expression neutral, as she cleared the counter and retreated to her room, the mug left in the sink like any other morning remnant. Sarah stirred awake upstairs, unaware of the exchange, going about her preparations with the usual efficiency. Meanwhile, Mark's symptoms intensified gradually. His heart began to beat irregularly, a tightness building in his chest that made breathing feel labored. He pulled over to the side of the road, sweat beading on his forehead, fumbling for his phone to call for help. Neighbors nearby noticed the distressed man in his vehicle, one rushing over to check on him as he slumped against the door, his body convulsing slightly from the internal disruption. Calls to emergency services echoed through the quiet street, sirens soon piercing the air as paramedics arrived, their urgent voices coordinating care. At the hospital, the emergency room buzzed with activity as Mark was wheeled in on a stretcher, monitors beeping erratically while doctors assessed his condition. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, and initial checks revealed fluctuating vital signs that puzzled the medical team. Sarah received the frantic call from a neighbor and rushed to his side, her face etched with worry as she held his hand, whispering words of encouragement amid the chaos. "What could have caused this?" she asked the attending physician, who ordered a battery of tests, suspecting something beyond a typical health episode. Emily, notified shortly after, made her way to the waiting area, her phone in hand as she texted friends about the sudden family issue, her tone matter-of-fact. Doctors stabilized Mark with fluids and medications, but the underlying cause remained elusive at first, his body fighting against an unseen invader. Toxicology screens were prioritized, samples drawn and rushed to the lab, where technicians worked methodically to identify any foreign substances. The waiting room filled with a tense silence, Sarah pacing while Emily sat quietly, offering occasional reassurances that seemed detached from the gravity of the situation. As test results trickled in, but the medical team noted abnormal compounds in Mark's system, synthetic elements not aligned with common illnesses or accidents. Whispers of possible ingestion spread among the staff, prompting notifications to authorities as protocol demanded. Detective Laura Mitchell, experienced in such cases, arrived promptly, her presence bringing a layer of official inquiry to the scene. She spoke first with Sarah, who recounted the morning's simplicity, mentioning Emily's unusual helpfulness with the coffee. Mitchell jotted notes, her instincts sharpening as she turned to Emily, who described the events with a shrug, claiming it was just a kind act to start the day right. The detective observed her calm, almost indifferent posture, filing it away as a potential tell. Back in the exam room, Mark stirred weakly, his voice hoarse as he tried to piece together his last memories, the coffee, the drive, the sudden onset. Doctors confirmed the presence of a chemical disruptor, one that could mimic natural ailments, raising alarms about intentional exposure. The hospital corridors hummed with subdued urgency, the family's world narrowing to beeps and whispered consultations. Emily's composure in the waiting room drew subtle glances from nurses, who noted her scrolling through her phone amid the crisis, as if passing time rather than grappling with fear. Sarah, overwhelmed, alternated between checking on Mark and comforting her daughter, on her mind racing through innocent explanations like contaminated food or environmental factors. But the toxicology report solidified suspicions. A pesticide derivative, potent in small doses, capable of causing severe internal imbalance. This wasn't a household accident, it required deliberate placement. Mitchell coordinated with a forensics team to secure the Carter home, treating it as a potential scene of concern. Emily, when questioned further, maintained her story, to her answers concise and unemotional, sparking Mitchell's curiosity about underlying motives. Mark, regaining some strength, expressed confusion, his trust in his family unshaken even as doubts began to form in the investigators' minds. The day stretched on, sunlight fading into evening, leaving the family in a limbo of uncertainty and emerging shadows. The neighborhood, once a haven of routine, buzzed with quiet speculation as news of Mark's hospitalization spread through casual conversations and concerned texts. Friends and colleagues reached out to Sarah, offering support and meals, their kindness a balm amid the turmoil. Emily fielded messages from her own circle, downplaying the severity with phrases like, "Dad's just under the weather," her online presence unchanged. Investigators, meanwhile, collected samples from the home, focusing on the kitchen where the mug sat untouched. Its residue, a silent witness. Lab analysis would later confirm the match to Mark's blood work, but in the moment, the puzzle pieces floated in ambiguity. Mark's recovery progressed slowly, his body expelling the toxin through treatments, but the emotional toll mounted as questions arose. Sarah reflected on recent family strains, sharing with Mitchell about the arguments over finances and independence, details that began to weave a narrative of possible intent. As night fell, the hospital quieted, Mark resting under watchful eyes while Sarah dozed in a chair nearby. Emily returned home briefly to gather items, her movements methodical, erasing any subtle traces she deemed necessary. But the digital echoes of her planning lingered, unseen for now. Detective Mitchell reviewed initial findings, piecing together timelines that pointed to a morning act of betrayal, her resolve strengthening to uncover the truth. The family's trust, already frayed, faced its greatest test, and with Mark's innocent sip becoming the catalyst for revelations ahead. The morning's simplicity unraveled into a web of suspicion, each hour bringing new layers to the unfolding story. Emily's gesture, once seen as thoughtful, now cast in a different light as investigators delved deeper into the home's secrets. Mark's strength returned gradually, his questions about the cause met with evasive answers from doctors, preserving the investigation's integrity. Sarah's worry deepened, her intuition sensing discord beyond the surface. Emily maintained her routine, attending school the next day with feigned normalcy, her friends none the wiser to the storm brewing at home. The chemical's nature, subtle, hard to trace, hinted at careful research, a detail that would soon lead detectives to digital trails. Neighborhood cameras overlooked in daily life held potential clues, their footage waiting to be reviewed. As the chapter's tension built, on the morning coffee stood as a pivotal moment, forever altering the Carter family's path toward confrontation and clarity. Chapter 4. The First Forensic Clue. The hospital corridors echoed with the steady hum of machines and muffled conversations as the initial toxicology results filtered back to the medical team attending Mark Carter. His blood work revealed traces of an unusual synthetic compound, something far removed from everyday substances or common medications. And it wasn't the kind of thing that appeared by accident, no hints of alcohol, no standard drugs that might explain his sudden collapse. Instead, the screens highlighted a chemical anomaly, one that disrupted bodily functions in a way that mimicked severe internal stress. Doctors exchanged concerned glances, their years of experience telling them this was no natural ailment. The substance's presence suggested ingestion, possibly deliberate, prompting an immediate call to local authorities as protocol demanded. In the quiet intensity of the lab, technicians double-checked their findings, ensuring accuracy before alerting the family. Sarah sat by Mark's bedside, her hand clasped in his, whispering hopes for recovery, while Emily lingered in the waiting area, her calm exterior masking any deeper thoughts. The revelation hung in the air like an unspoken question. You're shifting the day's chaos from medical mystery to something potentially more calculated. Detective Laura Mitchell, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for unraveling domestic puzzles, received the notification and arrived at the hospital within the hour. Her notebook ready and her mind already mapping out initial steps. She moved with purposeful calm, introducing herself to the medical staff and reviewing the preliminary reports in a side room filled with charts and monitors. The compound identified was a derivative of a restricted pesticide, rarely encountered outside specialized agricultural uses and certainly not in a suburban kitchen. Ingesting even a tiny amount could lead to rapid deterioration of vital systems, explaining Mark's erratic heart rhythm and crashing blood pressure. Mitchell absorbed the details, her thoughts turning to how such a thing could end up in a man's morning routine. She spoke briefly with the lead doctor on confirming the timeline of symptoms and the urgency of tracing the source. Outside, the hospital bustled with routine emergencies, but for the Carter family, this marked the beginning of a deeper scrutiny, one that would peel back layers of their everyday life. Mitchell's first move was straightforward yet crucial, securing permission to examine the Carter home, treating it as the potential origin of the incident. With Sarah's tearful consent, she coordinated a small team of officers and forensic specialists arriving at the quiet suburban house as neighbors watched curiously from their windows. The kitchen, still bearing the remnants of that morning's activities, became the focal point. Investigators donned gloves and methodically collected items, starting with the coffee mug Mark had used, its interior stained with faint residues that hinted at more than just brewed grounds. They bagged it carefully, along with the coffee pot, the filters and nearby containers, each piece a possible link in the chain. The air in the home felt heavy with unspoken tension, family photos on the walls contrasting sharply with the clinical intrusion. Emily, who had returned home briefly, observed from the living room with detached interest, answering basic questions about the morning without volunteering extra details. Mitchell noted her composure, filing it away as the team worked efficiently, preserving the scene for lab analysis. Back at the forensics lab, technicians wasted no time processing the collected samples, their equipment humming under bright lights as they tested for chemical matches. The mug's residue lit up under analysis, confirming the presence of the same pesticide derivative found in Mark's blood, a substance designed for controlled applications, not casual handling. Its potency was alarming. Even minimal exposure could trigger cascading effects on the heart and nervous system, leading to the kind of collapse Mark had experienced. The team documented every step, photographing the findings and cross-referencing with known databases to understand its origins. This wasn't a common household chemical. Acquiring it required specific knowledge and access, often through regulated channels or less conventional means. Investigators pondered the implications. Someone had introduced it deliberately, turning an ordinary routine into a hidden threat. The lab's sterile environment amplified the gravity, each test result building a foundation for what could become a full investigation. As the evidence mounted, Mitchell returned to the hospital to update Sarah and speak with Mark, who was slowly regaining strength under careful monitoring. His voice weak but steady, he recounted the morning again, emphasizing Emily's unexpected helpfulness with the coffee, a detail that now carried new weight. Sarah listened in stunned silence, her mind grappling with the possibility that something sinister had occurred in their own home. Mitchell asked gentle questions about recent visitors, household products, or any unusual packages, probing without accusation. The detective's approach was empathetic yet probing, drawing out details about family dynamics that might explain access and opportunity. Mark defended the normalcy of their life, his trust in those closest to him evident. But Mitchell's trained eye caught the subtle hesitations, the way Sarah glanced toward Emily in the adjoining room. The conversation planted seeds of doubt, transforming the hospital visit into the start of a broader inquiry. Emily's behavior during these early stages drew quiet attention from the investigative team. She remained remarkably poised, offering concise answers when questioned about the kitchen setup or her actions that morning. "I just made the coffee like always," she said with a shrug, her tone casual as if discussing weather rather than a potential health crisis. Mitchell observed this from afar, noting how Emily scrolled through her phone amid the unfolding events, her lack of visible distress standing out in a family gripped by worry. Psychologically, such calm could indicate many things: shock, denial, or something more calculated. The detective made mental notes on planning to delve deeper into Emily's recent activities, from school records to online habits. Meanwhile, the neighborhood whispered speculations, friends reaching out with concerned messages that Emily fielded with brief replies, maintaining her composed facade. The substance's rarity became a key focus, with experts consulted to trace its possible sources. It wasn't available in standard stores. Obtaining it often involved online orders from specialized suppliers, but sometimes under false pretenses to bypass regulations. Mitchell's team began reviewing shipping databases and local vendors, searching for any connections to the Carter address. This planning aspect suggested forethought, elevating the case from accident to intentional act. In the lab, further tests on the mug revealed concentration levels consistent with deliberate addition, not accidental contamination. The findings were documented meticulously, forming the backbone of an emerging case file. Mitchell felt the familiar pull of a puzzle coming together, each clue a step toward understanding the why behind the how. Interviews expanded beyond the family, with neighbors providing statements about the Carters' daily life, Mark's early departures, Emily's comings and goings, any unusual deliveries noticed. One recalled a package arriving weeks prior, a detail jotted down for follow-up. Sarah, torn between supporting her husband and processing the implications. He shared more about recent family tensions, including arguments over finances that had strained relations. Mitchell listened empathetically, piecing together motives that might explain such an extreme step. Mark, from his hospital bed, expressed bewilderment, his faith in his daughter clashing with the emerging evidence. The investigation's pace quickened, warrants prepared for digital records that could reveal planning. Emily's strange calm persisted as officers revisited the home for a more thorough search, her responses polite but minimal. She watched them collect additional items, like kitchen utensils and trash bins, without protest, almost as if expecting the scrutiny. Mitchell wondered if this confidence stemmed from youth or a belief in her own cleverness. Lab results continued to align, confirming the toxin's path from mug to Mark's system, with no other household sources matching. The case's complexity grew, poisoning incidents known for their evidentiary challenges, requiring airtight links to prosecute successfully. Team meetings in the precinct buzzed with strategy, Mitchell outlining next steps, subpoenaing phone records, reviewing security footage, and tracing the substance's purchase. The pesticide's dangers were reiterated, its ability to cause severe disruption without immediate traces, making it a choice for those seeking subtlety. Emily's access that morning stood out, the only variable in Mark's routine. Suspicion built, but proof remained the goal, with Mitchell determined to avoid assumptions. As days progressed, Mark's health improved, allowing discharge planning, but the emotional scars lingered. Sarah navigated visits between home and hospital, her worry compounded by investigative updates. Emily resumed school, her demeanor unchanged, but subtle cracks appeared in private moments of reflection. Digital forensics loomed large, with experts poised to recover deleted data that might expose searches or orders. The first clue from the mug had opened the door, but the full picture required connecting dots across time and intent. Neighborhood security cameras were canvassed, one yielding footage of a delivery that matched the timeline, a small package left on the porch. This breadcrumb energized the team, linking to the substance's source. Mitchell's resolve strengthened. Knowing poisoning cases demanded patience, but the evidence trail was warming, pointing inexorably toward answers. The chapter's revelations built tension, the forensic clue a spark igniting a fuller pursuit of truth as the Carters' world shifted under the weight of suspicion. In quiet reflections, Mark pondered the morning's trust, now shadowed, while Emily's calm facade held for now against the gathering storm of proof. Chapter 5. Digital Footprints. The investigation into Mark Carter's sudden health crisis took a decisive turn as Detective Laura Mitchell and her team shifted their focus from physical evidence to the invisible trails left in the digital world. In an era where online activity often reveals more than spoken words, Emily's devices became the next key to unlocking the mystery. Warrants were swiftly obtained, allowing forensics experts to examine her laptop, phone, and any connected accounts with meticulous care. What emerged was a narrative hidden in code and timestamps, one that Emily had believed was safely erased from view. Late-night sessions, when the house was silent and the rest of the family slept, painted a picture of quiet determination. Her browser history, recovered through advanced recovery tools, showed queries that grew increasingly specific over the weeks leading up to that fateful morning. It started innocently enough with general searches about health issues, but soon veered into territories that raised alarms among the investigators. Each click built a timeline, a digital diary of curiosity turning into something more purposeful, as if Emily was piecing together a puzzle only she could see. Experts in digital forensics worked through the night in a brightly lit lab, their screens flickering with lines of data pulled from servers and caches. Emily's laptop, a sleek model often used for schoolwork and social media, held secrets in its deleted files. One search, time-stamped at 1:47 a.m., about a month before the incident, read simply, "Substances that can cause heart problems without notice." It was followed days later by another, "Effects of certain chemicals on the body." The pattern was unmistakable, a progression from vague interest to detailed research. Mitchell reviewed the logs personally, her experience telling her this wasn't random browsing. The queries aligned too perfectly with the chemical found in Mark's system. The team cross-referenced these with known databases, confirming that the topics matched the pesticide derivatives profile. Emily had been careful, using incognito modes and clearing histories, but digital echoes lingered in places she hadn't considered, like cloud backups and provider records. The house's Wi-Fi logs, subpoenaed from the internet company, now filled in the gaps, showing activity spikes after midnight when solitude allowed unrestricted exploration. As the digital reconstruction continued, the team uncovered a series of searches that grew bolder, each one a breadcrumb leading closer to intent. Around 3 weeks prior, at 2:13 a.m., Emily had typed, "Poisons that mimic natural health failures." The phrase sent a chill through the room as analysts read it aloud, its implications clear in hindsight. Follow-up queries delved into timelines. How quickly do certain toxins affect someone? And duration of symptoms from ingestion. These weren't the musings of idle curiosity. They mirrored the real-world effects Mark had suffered, from the initial tremors to the collapse. Mitchell noted the precision, how Emily seemed to be calculating risks and outcomes, perhaps ensuring the act would blend into everyday mishaps. The laptop's metadata revealed multiple tabs open simultaneously, articles on chemistry, forums discussing undetectable methods, and even product pages for restricted substances. It was as if she was building a knowledge base, step by step, under the cover of darkness, while her family dreamed unaware upstairs. The investigators felt the weight of these discoveries, each one strengthening the case against mere coincidence. Delving deeper, the forensics team accessed Emily's email accounts, recovering deleted messages that hinted at transactions. One confirmation, buried in a trash folder, referenced an online order for a small container of a chemical compound shipped discreetly to the Carter address. The packaging was described as plain and unmarked, designed to avoid attention upon delivery. Emily had used a secondary email, one not linked to her main profiles, but IP traces tied it back to the home network. The order date aligned with the escalating family tensions, just after a major argument over finances. Mitchell's team contacted the vendor, a specialized supplier, confirming the purchase under a pseudonym that matched Emily's online aliases. The vial's contents? A match for the pesticide derivative potent enough in small doses to cause the disruptions seen in Mark's toxicology. Emily had attempted to cover her tracks by deleting the emails and clearing payment histories. But banking subpoenas revealed a debit card transaction that sealed the connection. It was a digital footprint she couldn't outrun, no matter how many caches she cleared. The late-night nature of these activities stood out starkly in the reports, with most searches occurring between midnight and 3 a.m., times when the household was at its quietest. Analysts pieced together a pattern. Emily would wait until Mark and Sarah's lights were off, then immerse herself in this hidden research. One particularly telling query from 12:56 a.m., just days before the morning in question, asked, "Do certain chemicals appear in standard tests?" It suggested a mind attuned to evasion, considering how to avoid detection in medical examinations. Mitchell discussed this with her team, highlighting how such planning indicated forethought, not impulse. The digital trail extended to her phone, where app data showed similar patterns, visits to encrypted sites and notes jotted in private memos. Even social media, though carefully curated, held subtle clues in private messages, where Emily vented frustrations that echoed the motive emerging from family interviews. The puzzle was forming, each piece a click or keystroke that brought the bigger picture into focus. Subpoenas for internet provider logs proved invaluable, revealing traffic data that Emily hadn't anticipated. These records, stored for compliance reasons, captured every site visited, every search entered, complete with exact timestamps and durations. The team reconstructed sessions down to the minute, a 45-minute deep dive into toxicology articles, followed by a quick check on shipping times for chemicals. It was exhaustive, painting Emily as someone methodically gathering information over weeks. Mitchell felt a surge of progress. This wasn't just evidence of curiosity, it was a roadmap to action. The logs even showed attempts to research data deletion methods, ironic given how those very searches were recovered. Collaborating with cyber experts, the investigators ensured every fragment was authenticated, building a chain of custody that would hold up in any legal setting. The digital world, often seen as ephemeral, had become a permanent witness to Emily's hidden pursuits. Amid these revelations, one question lingered prominently in the team's discussions. Why choose this moment to act? The digital footprints provided hints, but the full answer began to crystallize through recovered communications on Emily's phone. A series of texts and voice notes to friends revealed escalating frustrations timed closely with the searches. In one message, sent late at night after an argument, Emily wrote about feeling trapped and seeking ways to break free. The language was veiled, but when paired with the chemical queries, it took on new meaning. Mitchell's team analyzed these alongside the timelines, noting how a particularly heated family discussion about financial restrictions preceded a spike in research activity. It suggested a tipping point where resentment met opportunity in the form of online knowledge. The digital evidence was weaving motive into the narrative, transforming abstract suspicions into a coherent story. Phone forensics added another layer, with deleted apps and cached data uncovering orders placed through secure browsers. The small vials delivery was confirmed via tracking numbers pulled from provider logs, arriving inconspicuously amid regular mail. Emily had signed for it, according to reconstructed records, then promptly deleted the notifications. But the Internet's memory was longer, preserving metadata that linked the purchase to her device's unique identifiers. Analysts marveled at the thoroughness of her attempts to hide it, clearing cookies, using VPNs sporadically. But gaps remained, exploited by the team's tools. This digital cat-and-mouse game highlighted Emily's savvy, yet ultimately underscored her underestimation of forensic capabilities. Mitchell briefed her superiors, emphasizing how these footprints not only showed planning, but also intent, crucial for building a case beyond reasonable doubt. As the investigation progressed, the team cross-referenced the digital data with physical evidence from the home, finding alignments that strengthened their findings. For instance, the timestamp of a search for safe handling of toxins matched residue patterns on kitchen items. It was meticulous work involving hours of sifting through gigabytes of information, but each correlation added weight. Emily, unaware of the extent of the scrutiny, continued her daily routines, but subtle changes in her behavior, more guarded phone use perhaps, hinted at growing unease. Friends interviewed mentioned her recent interest in true crime podcasts, which now seemed less innocent in light of the searches. The digital realm had exposed a side of her that contrasted sharply with the outgoing teen known to her circle. The question of timing persisted, leading investigators to a pivotal conversation captured in Emily's phone backups. A voice note to a close friend, deleted but recovered, vented about Mark's latest restrictions. "He's cutting me off completely soon. I need to find a way out before it's too late." Sent just hours before a key search on chemical effects, it provided the emotional context missing from raw data. Mitchell listened to the recording multiple times, noting the frustration in Emily's voice, a blend of anger and resolve. This audio snippet, combined with texts echoing similar sentiments, bridged the gap between resentment and action. It suggested the poisoning wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but a response to accumulating pressures, timed when opportunity aligned with desperation. Digital experts continued their deep dive, uncovering forum posts under anonymous handles where Emily sought advice on hypothetical scenarios involving health disruptions. These were traced back through IP matches, adding anonymous voices to the evidence pile. The team felt the case solidifying, each footprint a step toward accountability. Mitchell reflected on how technology, meant to connect, often betrayed secrets in unexpected ways. The late-night searches, once private, now stood as silent accusers, ready to be presented in a courtroom setting. As patterns emerged, the investigation expanded to Emily's social media, where private groups and direct messages revealed more venting about family constraints. One post, quickly deleted, joked about invisible solutions to big problems, its timing suspicious, while analysts documented these, creating a comprehensive digital profile that humanized the data while underscoring inconsistencies in Emily's public persona. The subpoenaed records from providers arrived in waves, each batch revealing more layers, search histories from multiple devices synced across accounts. A forgotten tablet in the home yielded additional queries, reinforcing the obsession. Mitchell's team mapped it all on timelines, visualizing how digital activity peaked just before the incident, then dropped abruptly afterward. In quieter moments, investigators pondered the psychology behind such trails, how a young mind navigated the vast online world toward harmful knowledge. It was a reminder of digital permanence, where deletions offered false security. The evidence was mounting, pointing to a calculated path that began with a simple search and ended in a hospital room. The pivotal conversation's recovery marked a breakthrough, its words echoing in team discussions. "Once I'm free of him, everything will be easier," Emily had said in a text, its literal weight now apparent. This, tied to the searches, formed a narrative of motive and method compelling in its clarity. As the chapter drew to a close, the digital footprints had transformed suspicion into substance, each click a link in the chain leading toward truth. The investigation pressed on, with one question answered, but others looming, as the story of trust and betrayal continued to unfold. Chapter 6. The text message that changed everything. The digital forensics lab hummed with focused energy as analysts delved deeper into Emily Carter's phone, their tools recovering fragments of data that had been meticulously deleted in an attempt to bury secrets. What emerged from the depths of cached memory and cloud backups was a series of conversations that painted a vivid picture of simmering resentment. One thread, exchanged with a close friend over several weeks, stood out like a beacon amid the noise. It began innocently enough, with Emily venting about everyday frustrations, the curfews that cramped her social life, the lectures on responsibility that felt like chains. But as the messages progressed, the tone shifted, growing sharper and more pointed, revealing a young woman grappling with feelings of entrapment. Investigators read through them in stunned silence, each text a building block in understanding the emotional undercurrents that may have led to that fateful morning. The conversation wasn't just casual chatter, it was a window into a mind turning corners toward darker thoughts, where complaints evolved into something more calculated. Detective Laura Mitchell sat at a cluttered desk in the precinct, scrolling through the transcribed messages on her screen, her coffee growing cold as she absorbed the details. The earliest texts were light, Emily joking about her father's strict rules. "Dad's on my case again about staying out late, thinks I'm still a kid." Her friend responded with empathy, sharing similar stories, but Emily's replies escalated over time. Weeks later, the focus turned to money, with Emily lamenting the frozen accounts and restricted spending. "He's cutting me off completely, like I can't handle my own life." The frustration was palpable, words laced with anger that hinted at deeper wounds. Mitchell noted the timestamps, how these exchanges often occurred late at night, mirroring the patterns of her online searches. It was as if the digital world became Emily's confessional, a space to air grievances without the immediate consequences of face-to-face confrontations. The team cross-referenced these with family interviews, in seeing how they aligned with reported arguments, adding layers of context to the emerging narrative. As the conversation thread deepened, the messages took on a more ominous hue, shifting from mere complaints to hints of retaliation. Emily's words grew bolder, her friend occasionally cautioning her to calm down, but the responses pushed boundaries. One exchange, from about a month before the incident, captured a pivotal moment. "He's ruining everything, my plans, my freedom. I wish there was a way to just make it stop." The vagueness was telling, a subtle escalation that investigators flagged as potential foreshadowing. Mitchell discussed this with her partner, pointing out how the language evolved, from passive frustration to active resentment. The texts weren't isolated. They wove into the digital footprints already uncovered, creating a tapestry of motive. Emily's friend, when later interviewed, recalled feeling uneasy but dismissing it as typical teenage venting. Yet, in hindsight, the progression was clear, a slow burn toward a breaking point, where words hinted at actions yet to come. The stunning revelation came in a cluster of messages sent just 2 weeks prior, recovered from a deleted folder that Emily had overlooked in her cleanup efforts. One text, blunt and chilling, read, "He thinks he controls my life. Soon, he won't control anything." It hung there in the transcript like a declaration, its implications sending ripples through the investigative team. Mitchell read it aloud in a briefing, the room falling silent as colleagues processed the weight. This wasn't ambiguous. It spoke to a desire for liberation at any cost, tying directly to the family tensions over finances and independence. The message was followed by a string of emojis that seemed out of place, smirks and shrugs, as if Emily was downplaying her own intensity. Analysts confirmed the authenticity through metadata, ensuring it couldn't be dismissed as fabrication. This single line became a cornerstone, linking emotional motive to the physical evidence of the chemical in Mark's system. Days after that bold statement, Another message amplified the intrigue. "I found something online. No one will ever know." Emily's friend replied with confusion, asking for details, but the response was evasive. "Just a way to fix things. Don't worry." The vagueness was deliberate, but paired with the search history of toxins and their effects, it formed a damning connection. Mitchell's team analyzed the timing, sent shortly after a late-night browsing session on chemical properties, seeing it as a bridge between planning and execution. Prosecutors, reviewing the evidence, nodded in agreement. This was the motive they needed, a narrative thread that transformed suspicion into a compelling case. Yet, they cautioned, digital words alone weren't enough for conviction. Direct links to the act were essential. The text's secrecy underscored Emily's belief in her own cleverness, a theme echoing through her digital actions. With motive now firmly established through these recovered conversations, the investigation pressed forward, seeking the physical proof that would solidify the case. Detective Mitchell coordinated with tech specialists to ensure every message was backed up with unassailable data trails, preparing for potential courtroom scrutiny. The texts not only revealed Emily's mindset, but also highlighted her isolation, venting to a friend rather than seeking family resolution, a choice that spoke volumes about the fractured relationships at home. Sarah, when shown redacted versions during an update, reacted with heartbreak. He's struggling to reconcile the words with the daughter she knew. Mark, still recovering, expressed disbelief, his trust challenged by the emerging portrait. The messages became a tool for deeper interviews, prompting questions about specific arguments that matched the timelines, each answer adding nuance to the story. But the breakthrough that elevated the evidence came from an unexpected source, one Emily had never considered in her careful planning. While canvassing the neighborhood for additional leads, investigators requested footage from security cameras dotted along the street. Most offered little, but one system, installed across from the Carter home, captured crystal-clear video from weeks earlier. Mitchell reviewed the tapes in a dimly lit room, fast-forwarding through mundane daily activities until a delivery caught her eye. A van pulled up, the driver placing a small, unmarked package on the porch before driving away. Minutes later, Emily emerged, glancing around before picking it up, not through the front door, but veering toward the side of the house, disappearing from view. The footage was time-stamped precisely, aligning with the online order records. It was strange, deliberate behavior that suggested concealment, a visual clue that tied the digital orders to real-world actions. The camera's angle provided just enough detail to identify the package's label, matching the vendor's description from the subpoenaed records. Emily's movements were furtive, avoiding the main entrance where family might notice, heading instead to the backyard area. This something strange sparked immediate action. Mitchell obtained a warrant for a targeted search of the property's outer spaces, including the shed where tools and storage items were kept. What they found inside a discarded bag was telling: an empty vial. Its label partially obscured, but chemically matching the toxin in Mark's blood. Fingerprints dusted from the glass pointed directly to Emily, with no other matches in the household database. The footage, combined with this discovery, provided the direct proof prosecutors craved, bridging the gap from motive to method. Excitement rippled through the team as they pieced it together. The text about finding something online, now linked to a tangible delivery, captured on video. And Emily's assumption that no one would check neighborhood cameras had been her oversight, a common misstep in cases relying on digital anonymity. Mitchell replayed the footage, noting Emily's casual glance for observers, her steps measured yet hurried. It was a mini-climax in the investigation, a moment where abstract data met concrete reality. Prosecutors began outlining charges, the evidence now robust enough to move forward. The strange detour in the video lingered in discussions, a visual echo of secrecy that underscored the planning involved. As the chapter's revelations settled, the text messages stood as a turning point, their words echoing through the case like a confession unintended. They changed everything, transforming whispers of suspicion into a roar of evidence, while the camera footage added the undeniable link. The investigation surged ahead, with Emily's world of hidden resentments laid bare, setting the stage for the confrontations to come. And the digital echoes faded into the precinct's hum, but their impact resonated, a reminder that words, once sent, could never truly be erased. Mitchell closed her notebook, the weight of justice feeling closer as the story of betrayal continued its inexorable path. Chapter 7. The Package Delivery. The neighborhood street lay quiet under the afternoon sun 3 weeks before Mark Carter's collapse, the kind of ordinary day where deliveries blended into the background like forgotten routines. A white van pulled up to the Carter home, its engine idling softly as the driver hopped out with a small, unmarked package in hand. He placed it neatly on the porch, scanning a barcode before returning to his vehicle and driving away, leaving no trace of anything unusual. The camera across the street captured it all in crisp detail, its lens trained on the comings and goings of suburban life. Minutes ticked by, the package sitting innocently amid potted plants and welcome mats. Then, the front door creaked open, and Emily emerged, her glance sweeping the empty street before she stepped forward. She picked up the box with casual ease, but instead of heading back inside, she turned sharply, walking around the side of the house toward the backyard. The footage showed her disappearing from view, a subtle detour that would later raise questions about what she hoped to keep hidden from her family. Investigators, reviewing the tape days after the incident, paused and rewound the moment repeatedly, noting the deliberate path Emily chose. It wasn't the direct route through the front door, where Sarah or Mark might have noticed and asked about the delivery. Instead, she veered to the shed at the yard's edge, a weathered structure filled with garden tools and storage bins, rarely visited by anyone else. Mitchell's team, armed with this visual clue, obtained a search warrant and arrived at the property under the cover of an overcast morning. They moved methodically, gloves on and evidence bags ready, combing through the shed's cluttered interior. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beams as they sifted through shelves and corners, their search thorough but respectful of the family's space. Buried in a trash bag tucked behind old paint cans, they found it, an empty vial, its glass surface smudged but intact, the label faded yet identifiable as matching the chemical supplier's records. This small container, discarded in haste, held the potential to unlock the entire puzzle. Chemical analysis back at the lab confirmed what the team suspected. Residues clinging to the vial's interior matched the toxin detected in Mark's bloodstream, a precise alignment that left little room for doubt. The substance, a restricted compound meant for controlled uses, had no business in a backyard shed unless brought there intentionally. Technicians documented the findings with photographs and spectrographic charts, each detail building a bridge from digital orders to physical proof. Fingerprints lifted from the glass added another layer. Most belonged to Emily, her unique patterns appearing multiple times, as if she had handled it with care before disposal. No other family member's prints appeared, isolating her as the primary contact. Mitchell reviewed the report in her office, the weight of this discovery settling like a key turning in a lock. It wasn't just evidence. It was a direct link, transforming abstract suspicions into something tangible that prosecutors could hold up in court. But the shed held one more surprise, tucked amid the debris, a scrap of paper, crumpled and overlooked in the initial sweep. Unfolding it revealed 3 words scrawled in hasty handwriting. Just a little. The note's simplicity was haunting, a reminder perhaps jotted for personal reference, hinting at measured doses and careful planning. Analysts compared the script to Emily's known writing samples from school assignments, finding consistencies in the loops and slants. This tiny artifact, innocuous on its own, gained power when paired with the vial and footage, suggesting not just possession, but intent to use sparingly for maximum effect. Mitchell's team photographed it from every angle, preserving its context within the shed's disarray. The discovery energized the investigation. I'm providing a narrative thread that wove through the digital trails and family tensions, pointing toward a calculated act rather than random chance. Prosecutors, briefed on the findings, gathered in a conference room lined with case files, their discussions animated by the strength of this new evidence. The package delivery footage, combined with the vial and note, formed a compelling sequence. Order placed online, item received secretly, contents hidden and later discarded. And it addressed the critical question of access, showing how the toxin entered the home without raising alarms. Legal experts debated its presentation, envisioning how it would play in a courtroom, visuals of the van, Emily's detour, the shed shadows, all cinematic in their clarity. With motive from texts and searches already established, this proof elevated the case to one ready for charges. Mitchell felt a surge of satisfaction, and knowing that poisoning investigations often hinged on such physical links, elusive but game-changing when found. The warrant for Emily's arrest was issued swiftly, the document stamped and signed under the fluorescent lights of the judge's chambers. Officers prepared for the approach, coordinating to arrive at the Carter home in the early evening when routines were winding down. They knocked politely, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. And Sarah answered with a puzzled expression that quickly turned to shock as they explained their purpose. Emily, lounging in the living room with her phone, looked up as the officers entered, her face registering surprise, but no immediate fear. She set her device aside calmly, listening to the charges read aloud, attempted harm through chemical means, with evidence pointing to her involvement. The room grew tense, Sarah's hand flying to her mouth, but Emily's response was measured, almost detached, as if processing a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering moment. When asked if she understood the situation, Emily met the lead officer's gaze with a faint smile, her voice steady as she replied, "This is all a big misunderstanding." There were no tears, no outbursts of panic, just that composed expression, a hint of confidence that suggested she still believed the pieces wouldn't fully connect. Handcuffs clicked into place with a soft metallic sound, and she was led outside to the waiting vehicle, neighbors peeking from windows at the unfolding scene. Mitchell, observing from afar, noted the smile, interpreting it as a mask of denial or perhaps overconfidence in her youth shielding her. The arrest marked a turning point, shifting the case from investigation to legal proceedings, with Emily transported to the station for processing under the watchful eyes of the law. In the hours that followed, the precinct buzzed with activity as Emily was booked, her belongings cataloged, and her rights explained. She maintained her calm demeanor during initial questioning, denying any knowledge of the package or vial, her answers concise and evasive. Prosecutors reviewed the arrest footage, seeing in her smile a potential challenge for the courtroom, arrogance that could sway opinions. Sarah, devastated, visited Mark at the hospital to break the news, their conversation filled with shared disbelief and heartache. The family home, once a place of warmth, now felt shadowed by the events, its spaces searched and its secrets exposed. Media interest sparked quietly at first, local reporters picking up on the unusual case of a young woman accused of such a calculated act against her father. Headlines focused on the suburban normalcy disrupted, with details of the delivery and shed discovery leaking into early reports. Our community members expressed shock, recalling Emily as the friendly teen next door, struggling to reconcile that image with the charges. Online discussions bubbled, debating family dynamics and the pressures of youth, but the evidence's strength kept the narrative grounded in facts. Mitchell's team wrapped up loose ends, ensuring the package's chain of custody was impeccable, from delivery van to porch, shed to lab. The vials' fingerprints were double-checked, confirming no tampering. While the note's handwriting analysis added forensic weight. This convergence of proof felt like a climax in the investigative phase, each element reinforcing the others in a symphony of discovery. Emily, in holding, made a brief call to a friend, her tone light despite the circumstances, still holding on to that belief in untouchability. But the system moved forward, with bail hearings scheduled and defense strategies forming. The smile that accompanied her arrest lingered in Mitchell's mind, a symbol of the challenges ahead in proving not just actions, but mindset. As nights passed, Mark reflected on the package's arrival, a moment he might have missed entirely, now central to his ordeal. Sarah navigated the emotional fallout, supporting her husband while grappling with questions about their daughter. The neighborhood returned to its rhythms, but whispers persisted, a reminder of hidden tensions beneath familiar facades. Prosecutors built their case file. The delivery footage set to be a star exhibit, its silent testimony powerful in its simplicity. The warrant's execution had been smooth, but the real test loomed in court, where evidence would face scrutiny. The chapter's discoveries solidified the path to justice, the package a pivotal link that no amount of denial could erase. Emily's smile, captured in body cam videos, hinted at a confidence soon to be tested as the story edged closer to confrontation. In quiet precinct halls, Mitchell pondered the note's words. Just a little? A phrase that echoed the minimalism of the act, yet carried maximum consequences. The delivery had changed everything, sealing the evidence in a way that promised accountability ahead. Chapter 8. The Arrest. The evening light faded over the Carter neighborhood as police vehicles pulled up quietly to the house, their presence marking the culmination of weeks of painstaking investigation. Officers, equipped with body cameras rolling, approached the door with measured steps, the warrant for Emily's arrest clutched firmly in hand. Inside, the home carried on with its usual rhythm. Sarah preparing dinner in the kitchen, the scent of a simple meal filling the air, while Emily lounged on the living room couch, her fingers scrolling absently through her phone. The knock echoed softly, and Sarah answered, her face paling as she saw the uniformed figures. They explained the purpose calmly, their voices steady, but the words hung heavy. Emily was under arrest for the attempted harm of her father through chemical means. Sarah's hand trembled as she called for her daughter, the normalcy of the evening shattering like fragile glass. Emily looked up from her screen, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to something unreadable as the officers stepped inside to carry out their duty. Body cameras captured every detail of the moment, the lenses whirring silently as detectives informed Emily of the charges. She set her phone down slowly, her eyes meeting theirs without a flicker of alarm. Then, unexpectedly, a laugh escaped her lips, a short, disbelieving sound that cut through the tension like an unwelcome note. The officers exchanged glances, one repeating the charges to ensure clarity. Attempted actions leading to severe health disruption, with evidence linking her to the substance. Emily's laughter faded into a smirk, or her posture relaxed as if this were a minor interruption rather than a life-altering event. "You're serious?" she asked, her tone laced with amusement rather than fear. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, tears welling as she watched the scene unfold, her mind struggling to process the disconnect between the daughter she knew and this composed figure before her. The arrest proceeded methodically, handcuffs secured with a soft click, but Emily's reaction lingered in the air, on a puzzle that hinted at deeper layers yet to be uncovered. One officer, ensuring protocol, asked if Emily fully understood the gravity of the situation, the potential consequences, the rights she held. Her response stunned the room. "Good luck proving it." The words came out casually, almost playfully, as if challenging a game rather than facing legal weight. There was no panic, no pleas of innocence in that initial moment. Instead, she seemed intrigued by the process, her eyes scanning the officers with a fascination that bordered on detachment. Mitchell, reviewing the footage later, noted how Emily's demeanor suggested a belief in her own invulnerability, perhaps fueled by youth or a miscalculation of the evidence's strength. As she was led to the patrol car, neighbors' lights flickered on, curious faces peering from windows, but Emily walked with her head high, that faint smile still playing on her lips. The drive to the station was quiet, the city lights blurring past, marking the shift from home to holding cell. At the precinct, the interrogation room was stark and functional, its walls echoing with the hum of fluorescent lights as Emily was seated across from Detective Mitchell and a colleague. The body cam footage transitioned to fixed recordings, capturing her calm posture as questions began. She denied everything from the start, her voice steady and even. "I didn't do anything to my dad. This is all wrong." Despite the mounting evidence laid out before her, the digital searches, the vial from the shed, the delivery footage, she insisted it was a misunderstanding, perhaps contamination from elsewhere in the house. Mitchell pressed gently, referencing the texts and timelines, but Emily leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a mocking edge to her tone. "You think that's proof? People say things when they're upset." Her denials were consistent, woven with just enough detail to sound plausible, but the investigators saw through the facade, recognizing patterns of deflection often seen in those cornered by facts. Emily's fascination with the investigation became apparent during the questioning, her questions turning back on the detectives as if she were studying a script. "How did you even find that stuff?" she asked at one point, her eyes bright with curiosity rather than concern. Mitchell described the moment later in her notes, recalling how Emily smirked while dismissing the chemical matches. "People watch too many shows about investigations. You can't really prove something like that." The comment hung in the air, a blend of bravado and underestimation, as if she believed the science wouldn't hold. Yet, behind the scenes, forensic reports were already compiling irrefutable links, the toxin's signature tracing back to her actions. Emily's calm, an almost mocking demeanor, contrasted sharply with the emotional weight of the case, leaving the team to ponder the psychology at play, a young mind perhaps detached from the full repercussions. Prosecutors, reviewing the interrogation tapes, saw opportunity in Emily's responses. Her lack of remorse and casual dismissals could underscore the case's narrative of calculation over impulse. They prepared to build on this, gathering affidavits and expert statements to counter any defense of coincidence. Meanwhile, Sarah visited Mark at the hospital, her voice breaking as she recounted the arrest, the laughter that had pierced the moment like an unwelcome echo. Mark listened in stunned silence, his recovery overshadowed by the betrayal's sting, questioning how trust had led to this point. The family home felt emptier that night, shadows lengthening in the rooms where routines had once brought comfort. Emily, in a holding cell, stared at the ceiling, her mind perhaps replaying the day's events. That initial laugh now a distant memory amid the reality setting in. The media picked up the story subtly at first, local outlets reporting on the arrest of a young woman in a quiet suburb, details emerging about the family incident without sensationalism. Community reactions varied, shock from those who knew the Carters, discussions in online forums about parental pressures and youthful choices. Emily's friends, contacted for statements, expressed disbelief, recalling her as fun-loving and artistic, struggling to align that image with the charges. One mentioned offhand how she had seemed distant lately, venting about home life, but nothing that hinted at such extremes. Investigators noted these insights, adding to the psychological profile forming around Emily, a blend of resentment and perceived invincibility that had guided her steps. Back in the precinct, Mitchell and her team debriefed, analyzing Emily's interrogation for any slips that could strengthen the case. Her mocking tone, captured clearly on video, revealed a lack of empathy that experts later tied to personality traits often seen in calculated acts. Psychologists consulted on the case suggested evaluations aiming to understand the detachment that allowed such responses. Emily's claim that the substance must have come from somewhere else was dissected. They compared against the evidence chain, from online order to shed disposal, leaving no room for alternative explanations. The prosecution's file grew thicker, each piece interlocking like a well-constructed argument, ready to dismantle any lingering confidence. Emily's first night in custody passed uneventfully, her requests minimal as she adjusted to the new environment. Phone calls were monitored, her conversations with a family-approved contact brief and composed, in avoiding direct mentions of the case. Sarah, torn between loyalties, arranged for legal representation, her heart heavy with the duality of supporting her daughter while standing by Mark. The arrest's ripple effects extended to the neighborhood, where conversations over fences turned to reflections on hidden family struggles, a reminder that exteriors often masked deeper currents. As pretrial motions loomed, the team focused on solidifying witness lists, including experts in forensics who would explain the toxin's path in simple terms. Emily's smirk during interrogation became a focal point in strategy sessions, a visual that could illustrate the mindset behind the act. Mitchell reflected on the case's progression, from that first hospital call to this moment of accountability. The laughter in the living room, now a key element in the story's arc. Mark, gaining strength daily, spoke with counselors about the emotional toll. "I'm finding solace in small steps toward healing." Sarah navigated visits and updates, her resilience tested but holding firm. The arrest had shifted the dynamic irrevocably, forcing confrontations with truths long buried. In quieter precinct moments, officers discussed the psychology of such calm under pressure, Emily's responses a study in denial's power. The evidence, however, spoke louder, forensic science poised to counter every deflection with facts. The prosecution's preparation intensified, case outlines drafted with precision, each element aimed at exposing the full picture. Emily's initial laugh echoed in reviews, a sound that belied the seriousness now enveloping her world. As days blended, the case moved toward court, the arrest a bridge from investigation to judgment. Emily's fascination with the process waned slightly in solitude, hints of reality piercing the facade. The chapter's weight settled on the interrogation's end, Emily leaning back with that smirk. But the room's air thick with the promise of proof that would soon erase it. Forensic details compiled overnight, ready to challenge her words. In the end, the arrest's calm facade cracked subtly, Emily's mocking tone a memory as the system's machinery turned, leading toward a reckoning where confidence would meet consequence. The smirk, captured eternally on tape, began to fade in the face of unyielding evidence, a visual echo of arrogance meeting its match. Chapter 9. The Psychology of Control. In the sterile confines of a pretrial evaluation room, Emily Carter sat across from a team of psychologists, her posture relaxed as if attending a casual interview rather than a deep dive into her mindset. The assessments, mandated by the court to understand her capacity and motivations, unfolded over several sessions, each one peeling back layers of a personality that had long operated under a veil of charm. Experts observed her responses carefully, noting how she answered questions with a blend of wit and deflection, often steering conversations back to her own narratives. Reports compiled from these meetings painted a portrait of someone with pronounced traits of self-importance, where empathy for others seemed secondary to her own needs. Emily viewed rules as suggestions rather than boundaries, a perspective that had shaped her interactions from school to home. Friends, when interviewed separately, echoed this, recalling times she boasted about outsmarting teachers or bending guidelines to her advantage, always with a laugh that dismissed any consequences. The psychologists delved into her family dynamics, exploring how these traits manifested in daily life. Emily described her relationship with Mark as one of frustration, framing his guidance as overreach that stifled her independence. She spoke without visible regret, her tone matter-of-fact, as if recounting a minor inconvenience rather than events that nearly shattered her family. Lack of emotional connection stood out starkly. When asked about her father's suffering, she shrugged, focusing instead on how the situation inconvenienced her plans. This detachment, experts noted, aligned with patterns of emotional unavailability, where personal gain overshadowed relational bonds. Manipulation emerged as a key theme, subtle ways she influenced friends or navigated conflicts to her benefit, often leaving others questioning their own perceptions. In one session, she casually remarked on feeling superior to those around her, a grand sense of self that made her believe she could navigate any challenge unscathed. Grandiosity wove through her evaluations like a recurring thread, with Emily expressing beliefs that she was uniquely clever, destined for paths others couldn't comprehend. "I'm not like everyone else," she said during a discussion on decision-making, her eyes lighting up with a confidence that bordered on dismissal of authority. Psychologists linked this to her online activities, where searches for hidden solutions reflected a mindset convinced of outwitting systems. Friends confirmed these attitudes in statements, sharing stories of Emily bragging about being steps ahead in games or debates, her laughter ringing out as she claimed intellectual edges. Even in the evaluation room, she treated questions as opportunities to showcase her insights, turning assessments into platforms for self-praise. The reports highlighted how this inflated self-view might have fueled choices that prioritized her desires over potential harms, creating a bubble where accountability felt optional. Lack of empathy became a focal point in the assessments, with experts presenting scenarios to gauge her responses. When hypothetical situations mirrored her own, someone facing restrictions from a loved one, Emily's answers centered on the restricted person's frustrations, rarely acknowledging the other's perspective. This emotional gap, they concluded, allowed for actions detached from their impact, a trait often seen in individuals who rationalize decisions through self-centered lenses. In family contexts, it explained the escalating tensions. Mark's attempts at guidance were met with resistance, viewed not as care, but as threats to her autonomy. Sarah, reflecting in her own interviews, recalled moments where Emily seemed indifferent to family milestones, her focus inward. The psychologist notes emphasized how this trait, combined with manipulation, created a dynamic where relationships served as tools rather than genuine connections. Manipulation's subtleties surfaced in anecdotes from Emily's circle, where she often twisted narratives to align with her goals. One friend described how Emily convinced a group to skip responsibilities for fun outings, framing it as liberation while downplaying risks. In evaluations, she demonstrated this skill effortlessly, redirecting questions about her actions toward external blames, like societal pressures or family flaws. Experts saw patterns of charm used strategically, a tool to navigate social landscapes without deep accountability. This behavior extended to her digital world, where anonymous queries sought advantages without traces. The report synthesized these observations into a cohesive profile, a young woman whose sense of control drove her to test limits, believing her intelligence shielded her from fallout. It was a mindset that turned everyday resentments into calculated steps, where empathy's absence cleared paths for self-serving choices. Even after her arrest, Emily's attitude remained unchanged, treating the legal process like an intriguing diversion rather than a serious reckoning. In monitored calls from the detention center, she chatted with friends about the unfolding events, her voice light and unbothered. "It's like a bad movie," she quipped in one conversation, laughing off the charges as overblown. Psychologists reviewed these interactions, noting the consistent grandiosity, her predictions that the case would crumble, framed with a certainty that dismissed evidence. Our friends on the receiving end felt uneasy, later sharing how Emily downplayed the situation, focusing on her own discomfort rather than broader impacts. This post-arrest demeanor reinforced the evaluation's findings, showing a persistence of traits that viewed the world through a lens of personal exemption. The trial, in her words, became entertainment, a stage where she expected to shine rather than face judgment. During one particular jailhouse phone call, captured in full audio for review, Emily's confidence peaked in a telling exchange. "They'll never convict me," she told a friend, her tone laced with amusement as if sharing an inside joke. The friend probed gently, expressing worry, but Emily brushed it aside. "I've got this figured out. They're not as smart as they think." The call, lasting just minutes, encapsulated her grand sense of self, a belief that rules and systems bent to her will. Prosecutors listened intently, seeing in it ammunition for their arguments, a lack of remorse that could sway opinions. Psychologists added this to their reports, highlighting how such statements reflected ongoing denial and manipulation, attempts to control narratives even from behind bars. It was a mini-climax in understanding her psychology, a voice revealing the core traits that had driven the events. Yet, beneath this facade of control, the case held one more layer Emily hadn't anticipated, a detail buried in the hospital's toxicology records that would challenge her certainty. The reports, detailed and precise, included a unique chemical signature, a molecular fingerprint tracing the substance back to its exact manufacturer. This wasn't just a generic match, it was a specific identifier, like a serial number etched into the compound structure, linking it irrefutably to the vial ordered under her digital trail. Lab experts had flagged it early, but held it close, waiting for the right moment to integrate it into the evidence chain. Mitchell, reviewing the file, felt the pieces align perfectly. This signature, the quiet key that could unlock any remaining doubts. It sat unassuming in the documents, a scientific echo ready to dismantle claims of coincidence. The manufacturer's records, subpoenaed discreetly, confirmed the batch details, tying the toxin to a limited production run accessible only through specialized channels. In this precision elevated the evidence, showing not just possession, but a direct path from purchase to use. Prosecutors smiled at the revelation, envisioning its presentation, an expert on the stand explaining the signature's uniqueness, how it matched like a puzzle piece. Emily, unaware during her evaluations, continued her bravado, but this hidden detail loomed as a counterpoint to her control. Psychologists noted how such overconfidence often blinded individuals to overlooked flaws, a trait evident in her assessments. The signature's existence promised a shift, where perceived untouchability met undeniable science. Friends, reflecting on Emily's boasts of being smarter than everyone, now saw them in a new light, sharing stories of times she orchestrated plans that backfired subtly. One recalled a school project where her manipulations led to group tensions, her apologies superficial. These anecdotes bolstered the psychological profile, illustrating how grandiosity played out in everyday scenarios. In sessions, Emily dismissed such examples, reframing them as others' misunderstandings, her manipulation evident even in defense. The reports concluded with recommendations for further observation, emphasizing the trait's role in her choices, a mindset where control trumped compassion. As evaluations wrapped, the courtroom loomed closer, Emily's attitude a double-edged sword that could either alienate or intrigue. Prosecutors prepared to weave the psychological insights into their narrative, highlighting how these traits fueled the act. The jailhouse call's words echoed in planning sessions, a stark illustration of denial's grip. Mitchell pondered the human elements, how a need for control could lead to such paths, the evaluations offering glimpses into motivations beyond surface resentments. Mark and Sarah, receiving summarized reports, grappled with the insights, finding some solace in understanding, though it deepened their sorrow. The family sought counseling, navigating the emotional landscape shaped by these revelations. Emily, in her cell, maintained her entertainment view of the trial, oblivious to the chemical signature waiting in the wings. The manufacturer's trace, quiet yet powerful, represented the case's unseen strength, a detail that could tip scales toward clarity. Experts prepared testimonies, ready to explain its significance in accessible terms, bridging science and story. In quieter moments, psychologists reflected on Emily's case as a study in control's illusions, where perceived superiority met reality's checks. The evaluations closed a chapter of insight, setting the stage for legal confrontations ahead. Friends' confirmations of her bragging added personal touches to the profile, humanizing the traits while underscoring their impact. Emily's belief in rules not applying to her resonated through every assessment, a core that explained much. The jailhouse call, with its bold prediction, lingered as a psychological peak, but the toxicology's hidden signature promised to counter it, a scientific whisper against vocal confidence. As reports finalized, the psychology of control stood revealed, Emily's traits a lens through which her actions gained meaning. The smirk from earlier moments echoed faintly, now shadowed by evidence's quiet certainty. Chapter 10. The courtroom opens. The courtroom doors swung open on a crisp morning, welcoming a crowd of reporters, family members, and curious onlookers who filled the wooden benches with a murmur of anticipation. Sunlight filtered through high windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors as the bailiff called the session to order. Emily Carter, escorted in with a calm stride, took her seat at the defense table, her expression a mask of quiet composure that belied the storm brewing within these walls. The judge, a stern figure with years of experience etched into his features, settled into his elevated bench, his gaze sweeping the room to ensure decorum. This trial, centered on a young woman's alleged attempt to harm her own father through a hidden chemical, drew attention for its rarity. Cases of this nature involving someone so young were few and far between, often sparking debates about family bonds and youthful choices. Prosecutors and defense attorneys exchanged nods, their briefs stacked neatly, are ready to unravel a story that had gripped the community since the arrest. Emily glanced around briefly, her faint smirk emerging like a subtle challenge as the proceedings began with the familiar rhythm of legal formalities. Reporters scribbled notes furiously from the back rows, their presence a reminder of how this suburban tale had captured wider interest, with headlines painting pictures of fractured trust and hidden resentments. The prosecution rose first, a seasoned attorney whose voice carried steady authority as she outlined the case's foundation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her words clear and measured. Emily Carter meticulously planned and carried out an attempt to endanger her father's life, all in pursuit of the financial independence she craved. She described the morning coffee, the subtle addition of a dangerous substance, and the digital trails that led investigators to the truth. Visual aids were prepared, charts of timelines and evidence photos projected on a screen to illustrate the sequence without overwhelming the senses. Emily listened, her arms crossed, that faint smirk playing at the corners of her mouth as if the accusations were mere suggestions rather than grave charges. The courtroom air grew thicker, the weight of the narrative settling over everyone as the prosecutor promised to reveal a pattern of calculation driven by personal gain. The defense, stepping forward with equal poise, countered with a narrative of doubt and possibility, arguing that the evidence presented was far from conclusive. "This is a case built on assumptions," the attorney declared, his tone firm yet empathetic, suggesting that the chemical's presence could stem from accidental exposure or environmental factors beyond Emily's control. He painted her as a typical young woman navigating family pressures, not a figure of malice, emphasizing gaps in the prosecution's chain, perhaps a contaminated product or an overlooked household source. Jurors leaned in, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism as the defense highlighted Emily's youth and the lack of direct witnesses to any harmful act. Throughout this opening, Emily whispered something to her lawyer, a quiet joke that elicited a brief smile from him, her lightheartedness standing out in the solemn space. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, observing the exchange, a silent note of the demeanor that could influence perceptions. As the trial progressed into its early testimonies, the courtroom became a theater of human stories, with witnesses called to recount their pieces of the puzzle. A neighbor took the stand first, describing the quiet street and the delivery van's arrival weeks before the incident, her voice steady as she confirmed the footage's details. Prosecutors played the video clip, the screen showing Emily's deliberate path around the house, a move that drew murmurs from the gallery. Emily watched impassively, her smirk fading only momentarily as the jury absorbed the visuals. The defense cross-examined gently, probing for alternative explanations like routine errands, but the witness held firm, her account adding a layer of intrigue to the narrative. Reporters outside the doors huddled during breaks, speculating on how such everyday moments could unravel into something so profound, their stories feeding a growing public fascination with the case's emotional depths. Mark Carter's testimony came next, his voice carrying the quiet strength of recovery as he described that ordinary morning and the trust he had placed in his daughter. Seated in the witness box, he recounted the coffee's warmth, the casual conversation, and the sudden onset of symptoms that changed everything. The courtroom fell silent, empathy rippling through the air as he spoke of the pain, not just physical, but the emotional wound of betrayal. Emily met his gaze briefly, her expression unchanging, that faint smirk returning as if to dismiss the weight of his words. The prosecutor guided him through details of family tensions, the arguments over finances that had built like gathering clouds, painting a picture of motive rooted in resentment. Jurors nodded subtly, their notepads filling with observations, while the judge maintained order, his watchful eyes ensuring the testimony flowed without interruption. Sarah's turn on the stand brought a wave of raw emotion, her words trembling as she shared the family story from her perspective. The love that had defined their home, now shadowed by doubt. She described Emily's unusual helpfulness that morning, a gesture that seemed kind at the time, but now carried layers of suspicion. Tears glistened in her eyes as she spoke of the hospital vigil, the fear of losing Mark, and the confusion of seeing her daughter arrested. The defense approached with care, suggesting Sarah's recollections might be clouded by stress, but she stood resolute, her account adding heartfelt depth to the prosecution's case. Emily whispered another quip to her attorney during this, a moment caught by nearby jurors who exchanged glances, the faint smirk drawing silent judgments. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened with the personal stakes, in each testimony a brushstroke in a larger portrait of fractured bonds. Forensic experts followed, their presentations grounded in science yet accessible, explaining the chemical's properties with charts and models that illuminated its dangers. One specialist detailed how the substance disrupted vital functions subtly, mimicking natural ailments to evade quick detection. The jury followed intently as he connected the dots, from the vial in the shed to residues in the mug and Mark's bloodwork, each link fortified by lab data. Emily's smirk persisted, but her whispers to counsel increased, perhaps a sign of the evidence's mounting pressure. The defense challenged the findings, proposing alternative sources like industrial leaks. But the expert's calm rebuttals held sway, his explanations clear and unshakable. Reporters noted the shift in room energy, the scientific backbone strengthening the narrative of intent over accident. Digital forensics took center stage next, an analyst projecting recovered searches and messages on the screen, each timestamp a nail in the case's structure. The jury watched as queries for substances mimicking health issues scrolled by, aligned perfectly with the incident's timeline. Emily's expression remained composed, but her faint smirk twitched as her own words from text were read aloud, vents about control and freedom that now echoed ominously. The defense objected, claiming privacy invasions, but the judge overruled, allowing the digital trail to speak. Whispers rippled through the gallery, the modern twist of online footprints fascinating those who followed the trial's updates. This testimony bridged technology and motive, showing a mind at work long before the act. Throughout these openings, Emily's behavior drew increasing attention, her faint smirk a constant amid the unfolding drama. She leaned toward her attorney during breaks, sharing quiet laughs that seemed out of place in the grave setting. Jurors, diverse in backgrounds, couldn't ignore it, some furrowed brows, others subtle shakes of heads, as the judge's gaze lingered on her, a silent warning against disruptions. This arrogance, subtle yet persistent, rarely fared well in such arenas where humility often swayed sympathies. But the prosecution noted it mentally, planning to highlight how it reflected a lack of remorse, while the defense whispered reminders of courtroom etiquette. The room's tension built, each witness adding weight as evidence promised to escalate further. Neighborhood friends were called, their testimonies offering glimpses into Emily's world beyond the family home. One described her outgoing nature, the fun gatherings where she shone, but admitted to messages venting frustrations that now seemed telling. The prosecution probed these, linking them to the motive of seeking independence at any cost. Emily watched with that smirk, perhaps seeing old conversations twisted against her, her whispers to counsel a mix of strategy and amusement. The defense countered by emphasizing youthful exaggeration, but the jury absorbed the personal insights, humanizing the charges while underscoring patterns of discontent. Reporters outside buzzed with quotes, the trial's human elements fueling stories of everyday lives upended. Medical professionals detailed Mark's ordeal, their accounts clinical yet poignant, describing the race to stabilize him amid unknown factors. Charts showed fluctuating vitals, the toxin's subtle assault explained in terms jurors could grasp. Emily's smirk faded slightly here, her eyes fixed on the screen, but she recovered quickly with a quiet comment to her lawyer. The judge intervened once, reminding all of decorum, his voice firm as he watched her closely. This moment highlighted the courtroom's delicate balance, where personal attitudes could tip scales. The testimony reinforced the harm's severity, bridging science with suffering as the case built toward deeper revelations. As the day wore on, opening arguments gave way to a rhythm of questions and answers, the courtroom a stage where truths competed. Emily's faint smirk became a subtle undercurrent, unnoticed by all, whispering of confidence that clashed with the mounting proof. Whispers to her attorney, light and jesting, punctuated tense moments, drawing the judge's vigilant eye. Arrogance like this, history showed, often backfired in halls of justice, where humility opened doors to doubt. Especially now, as the evidence montage loomed, ready to unfold with relentless clarity. The prosecution wrapped initial witnesses with a toxicologist, his expertise shining light on the chemical's rarity and the planning required for its use. Jurors leaned forward, absorbing how such a substance demanded intent, not chance. Emily's expression held, but her jokes to counsel lessened, the weight perhaps settling. The defense promised rebuttals, but the day's momentum favored facts over theories. Reporters filed out for updates, the trial's theater captivating audiences beyond the walls. Breaks allowed brief reflections. On Emily conferring with her team, her smirk a shield against the stares. The judge, from his bench, observed it all, his role as arbiter ensuring fairness amid the drama. This opening set the tone, a blend of emotion and evidence as the case pressed toward confrontations ahead. In quieter interludes, family supporters exchanged worried glances, the personal toll evident. Emily's behavior, that persistent faint smirk, lingered as a question. Defiance or denial? The courtroom's air hummed with anticipation, the judge's watchful presence a reminder that every action mattered. As sessions adjourned for the day, the faint smirk on Emily's face echoed in memories, a visual note of the challenges to come. The evidence, building steadily, promised to challenge it as the trial's theater continued its gripping unfolding. Chapter 11. Forensic Breakdown. The courtroom hummed with a tense hush as the prosecution called their first expert witness, a forensic toxicologist with decades of experience unraveling the secrets hidden in everyday substances. He took the stand, his voice steady and clear, explaining the nature of the chemical at the heart of this case, a derivative from a controlled pesticide, not something found in typical homes or stores. Designed for specific industrial uses, it carried a potency that made it dangerously effective when misused. Even in tiny amounts, it could disrupt the body's natural rhythms, leading to severe internal strain that mimicked common health issues. The jury leaned forward, absorbing his words as he used simple diagrams to illustrate how the substance worked its way through the system, gradually building to a crisis point. Emily sat at the defense table, her faint smirk still lingering, but her eyes followed the presentation closely, as if weighing each detail against her own calculations. The expert's testimony set the stage, transforming abstract science into a relatable story of hidden risks lurking in the familiar. Lab technicians followed, their accounts methodical yet compelling, detailing the rigorous tests conducted on samples from 3 key locations. First, Mark Carter's blood work showed clear traces of the chemical, levels consistent with recent ingestion that had thrown his vital functions into disarray. They described the hospital's urgent analysis, how initial screens flagged the anomaly, leading to deeper scans that confirmed the match. The jury nodded, following along as charts projected the data points, each one a marker of the body's struggle. Emily whispered something to her lawyer, her expression unchanging, but the room's focus sharpened on the evidence's precision. This wasn't guesswork, it was science speaking through numbers and reactions, building a foundation that tied the incident directly to deliberate exposure. The technicians emphasized the care taken in handling samples, ensuring no contamination skewed the results, their words painting a picture of unseen battles fought in sterile labs. Shifting to the coffee mug, the experts delved into the residue analysis, revealing how faint particles clung to the ceramic surface, invisible to the naked eye, but glaring under microscopic scrutiny. Tests confirmed the same chemical signature, concentrations suggesting it had been added directly to the liquid, not diffused from elsewhere. The prosecution displayed enlarged images of the mug, highlighting the telltale traces that aligned perfectly with Mark's symptoms. Jurors exchanged glances, the everyday object now a symbol of betrayal, its role in the morning routine twisted into something sinister. Emily's smirk faded just a touch, her fingers tapping lightly on the table as the testimony unfolded, perhaps sensing the web tightening. The experts explained the improbability of accidental presence. Household cleaners or spills wouldn't match this profile, driving home the point that this was no random occurrence, but a targeted introduction. The empty vial from the shed became the third pillar, its discovery recounted with forensic detail that captivated the room. Technicians described lifting residues from the glass, matching them identically to the mug and blood samples, the chemical's composition leaving no room for doubt. Fingerprints dusted from the surface pointed squarely to Emily, with patterns unique to her touch appearing in multiple spots. The jury viewed photos of the vial nestled in its discarded bag, a hidden relic now exposed to light. Odds of coincidence, the experts stated firmly, were astronomically low, less than 1 in a million, based on molecular comparisons. Emily leaned back, her faint smirk returning as if to dismiss the statistics, but the courtroom grew quieter, the weight of the triple match settling like an undeniable truth. This montage of evidence wove the locations together, each test a thread strengthening the narrative of intent over accident. Prosecutors built on this foundation by introducing shipping records, their presentation smooth and methodical, tracing the chemical's journey from supplier to doorstep. The order had been placed online under a fabricated name, a detail that drew murmurs from the gallery as documents flashed on the screen. Yet the facade crumbled under scrutiny. The payment traced back to Emily's personal debit card, timestamps aligning with her late-night digital activity. Experts explained the forensic accounting, how transaction logs captured every detail, from IP addresses to confirmation emails recovered from deleted folders. The jury followed the trail, seeing how anonymity attempts failed against persistent data trails. Emily's expression held steady, but her whispers to counsel increased, the smirk softening as the direct link to her finances emerged. This wasn't vague suspicion. It was a financial fingerprint, tying her actions to the substance's arrival in a way that defied denials. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened with each reveal, the evidence montage flowing like a carefully scripted sequence, each expert adding layers to the prosecution's case. Reporters in the back jotted notes furiously, capturing quotes that would headline evening updates, on the story's scientific intrigue drawing wider audiences. Jurors, a mix of everyday folks, absorbed the breakdowns with focused attention, their questions during sidebars revealing genuine engagement with the complexities. Emily maintained her composure, but subtle shifts, like a brief glance at the projected records, hinted at the pressure building beneath her surface. The defense prepared cross-examinations, aiming to poke holes in methodologies, but the experts' calm rebuttals held firm, their data unyielding. This phase transformed the trial from emotional testimonies to hard facts, bridging human stories with laboratory precision. As the montage continued, a digital forensics specialist took the stand, delving into the online purchase's intricacies, explaining how false accounts were unraveled through metadata and server logs. The false name, clever at first glance, linked back via email patterns and device identifiers, unique to Emily's usage. Shipping details matched the neighborhood camera footage, creating a seamless chain from click to delivery. The jury viewed timelines syncing the order with family arguments, motive interwoven with method. Emily's faint smirk persisted, but her eyes narrowed slightly at the screen, perhaps recognizing the thoroughness that had outpaced her precautions. Prosecutors emphasized the planning evident in these records, each step a deliberate choice toward the morning's act. The room grew quiet, the evidence's accumulation creating a palpable shift, as if the scales were tipping inexorably. Lab confirmation of the chemical's rarity added weight, the expert noting its restricted status and the knowledge required for safe handling, or in this case, misuse. Small doses, he reiterated, could lead to profound disruptions, aligning exactly with Mark's experience. Visual aids showed molecular structures, simplifying the science without losing impact. Emily whispered a joke to her attorney, eliciting a quick hush from the judge, his gaze sharp on her table. The smirk faded a bit more, the courtroom's solemnity pressing against her light-hearted asides. Jurors took notes, connecting the dots from purchase to effect, the odds of unrelated exposure dismissed as negligible. This breakdown not only proved presence but intent, a forensic narrative that stood robust against scrutiny. Prosecutors transitioned smoothly to payment traces, I'm displaying bank statements that highlighted the transaction, funds drawn from Emily's account in a moment of digital vulnerability. Experts explained encryption cracks and recovery techniques, turning what seemed hidden into clear evidence. The jury murmured softly, the direct tie to her finances a compelling hook. Emily's expression remained composed, but the faint smirk waned, her posture straightening as the implications sank in. This reveal quieted the room further, of the evidence's precision echoing like a steady drumbeat, building toward climactic disclosures. Defense objections arose, questioning data integrity, but rebuttals from the stand reinforced the findings' reliability, each point a reinforcement of the case's strength. The montage's rhythm carried into discussions of contamination probabilities, experts calculating scenarios where the chemical could appear coincidentally, results showing near impossibility without deliberate action. Charts illustrated these odds, visual proofs that captivated the audience. Emily's whispers lessened, her attention fixed on the testimony, the smirk now a shadow of its former self. Prosecutors wove in the shed's vial, its fingerprints a personal stamp on the chain. The courtroom, alive with focused energy, felt the shift, evidence mounting like layers of certainty. Reporters anticipated the day's close, stories of scientific unraveling ready for broadcast. As experts stepped down, the prosecution hinted at more to come, the biggest reveal simmering beneath the surface. The jury recessed with minds full, the forensic breakdown a turning point that transformed doubts into convictions. Emily glanced at her lawyer, the faint smirk attempting a return, but the room's quiet intensity suggested its time was fading. The trial pressed on, each detail a step closer to resolution. The evidence's flow continued with a recap of lab protocols, ensuring jurors understood the safeguards against errors, building trust in the process. Emily's faint expression held, but subtle tensions emerged, her earlier confidence tested by the barrage. The judge maintained order, his presence a steady anchor amid the revelations. Prosecutors closed the segment with emphasis on the three-location match, reiterating the near-zero coincidence factor, a statistical nail in the narrative. The room grew profoundly quiet, the smirk on Emily's face dimming as the weight settled. Yet the stage was set for more, a hidden gem in her phone waiting to emerge. Breaks allowed brief reflections, jurors discussing in hushed tones, the forensic details resonating deeply. Emily conferred with her team, her lightheartedness subdued, the evidence's impact undeniable. The trial's theater intensified, science's voice loud and clear. In the chapter's winding path, the breakdown illuminated paths of proof, each expert a guide through complexity. The courtroom, charged with anticipation, awaited the next layer, the smirks fade a quiet harbinger of shifts ahead. The biggest reveal loomed, tucked in digital depths, ready to unfold and challenge remaining defenses. Emily's phone, a silent witness, held secrets that would soon echo through the hall. The forensic montage, thorough and unyielding, set the foundation for what followed. Chapter 12. The Search History. The courtroom's atmosphere grew even more charged as the prosecution transitioned from forensic breakdowns to the digital realm, calling a cyber forensics expert to the stand. His testimony began with a calm explanation of how deleted data often leaves traces, recoverable through specialized tools that delve into device memories and cloud backups. Projectors hummed to life, casting a large screen with Emily's reconstructed internet search history, each entry time-stamped and authenticated. Jurors shifted in their seats, eyes widening as the list scrolled into view, a silent parade of queries that painted a chilling picture of curiosity turning deliberate. Emily sat rigidly at the defense table, her faint smirk now absent, replaced by a tense stare fixed on the display. The expert narrated softly, highlighting how these searches spanned weeks, building like steps in a hidden plan, each one more specific than the last. And the room fell into a profound hush, the weight of unspoken intentions hanging heavy as the evidence unfolded before them. The first projections drew immediate attention. Substances that cause heart issues without trace entered late at night when the house was asleep. The expert pointed out the timestamp, aligning it with family tensions reported in earlier testimonies, a quiet correlation that spoke volumes. Jurors leaned forward, notebooks in hand. As more entries appeared, effects of quick-acting chemicals on the body. Emily's attorney rose swiftly, objecting on grounds of relevance and privacy, his voice sharp in the otherwise still room. The judge considered briefly, then overruled, allowing the presentation to continue, deeming the pattern too consistent to ignore. Whispers rippled through the gallery, reporters jotting furiously, sensing the momentum shifting further. Emily's eyes darted to her lawyer, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she composed herself quickly, crossing her arms as if to shield against the mounting revelations. The expert proceeded, his voice steady, weaving the searches into a narrative of escalating research that mirrored the chemical's effects on Mark. As the list lengthened, the queries grew bolder, each one a breadcrumb leading closer to the morning in question. Ways to mimic natural health failures, typed in the dead of night, followed by duration of symptoms from certain ingestions. The timestamps clustered around periods of reported family arguments, painting a timeline of resentment, fueling action. Jurors exchanged subtle glances, the pattern emerging unmistakably, planning etched in digital ink. Emily's attorney objected again, arguing the searches could reflect innocent curiosity, perhaps from school projects or casual browsing. The judge paused, consulting briefly with both sides, but permitted the evidence, noting its direct tie to the case's core. The courtroom's tension thickened, the air almost electric, as the expert explained recovery methods, ensuring jurors understood the data's integrity. Emily shifted in her seat, her earlier confidence waning, the screen's glow reflecting off her face in a way that highlighted a growing nervousness she tried to mask. The projections continued, revealing searches that delved into practicalities. How long do effects take to appear after consumption? The expert highlighted the progression from broad inquiries to precise details that aligned with the toxin's known behaviors. Murmurs arose from the back, where family supporters sat, their faces etched with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. Emily whispered urgently to her attorney, her voice low but insistent, prompting another objection, this time on speculative interpretation. And the judge overruled once more, his ruling firm, emphasizing the jury's role in weighing context. The room quieted again, attention riveted to the screen as the expert connected these dots to the morning coffee, showing how knowledge gleaned online could facilitate such an act. For the first time, Emily's hands clenched slightly under the table, a subtle sign that the barrage of her own words, now public, was piercing her composed exterior. Deeper into the history, your entries turned toward evasion, methods to avoid detection in standard tests. The timestamp placed it just days before the incident, a detail that drew audible gasps from the gallery. Jurors' eyes widened, the implication clear. This wasn't idle wondering, but a calculated effort to cover tracks. Emily's attorney stood, objecting repeatedly, his arguments growing more fervent, claiming the evidence invaded personal privacy without proving intent. The judge allowed brief debate, then sided with the prosecution, stating the pattern's relevance outweighed concerns. The expert resumed, his tone measured, illustrating how these queries built a blueprint for subtlety, mirroring the chemical's subtle disruption. Emily's face paled subtly, her gaze fixed on the floor for a moment, the nervous energy now evident in her posture. Reporters in the back exchanged notes, sensing this as a pivotal shift, on the digital trail exposing layers of forethought that no denial could easily dismiss. The screen scrolled to more incriminating lines. Fast-acting options that blend into drinks. The expert paused, letting the words sink in, before explaining the alignment with household routines like morning coffee. Jurors took diligent notes, their expressions a blend of focus and discomfort, as the pattern solidified. Research not random, but targeted. Objections flew from the defense. Each one met with judicial patience, but the evidence stood, its consistency a silent force. Emily's whispers to her lawyer intensified, her earlier smirk long gone, replaced by a furrowed brow that betrayed inner turmoil. The courtroom's hush deepened, the weight of these revelations pressing on everyone, transforming abstract suspicions into a vivid chronicle of steps toward an unthinkable choice. The expert's narration flowed seamlessly, each search a chapter in a story of quiet determination, leaving little room for alternative interpretations. As the presentation peaked, the most striking entries emerged. How long until certain substances cause collapse? Time-stamped amid escalating family strains, it drew a collective breath from the room. The expert connected it to Mark's symptoms, the timeline a perfect match that underscored execution over coincidence. Emily's attorney objected vigorously, arguing for suppression due to potential prejudice, but the judge, after consideration, allowed it, citing the undeniable relevance. Jurors' faces showed the impact, eyes narrowing as they pieced together the puzzle. Emily looked up briefly, her nervousness now visible in the way she avoided the screen, a stark contrast to her initial courtroom poise. The gallery stirred faintly, whispers of shock circulating as the prosecution let the evidence speak, its clarity a compelling argument against innocence. This mini-climax built tension, each query a revelation that chipped away at defenses, setting the stage for deeper emotional layers. The final cluster of searches brought a chilling crescendo. Can traces be found after initial reactions? Entered mere hours before the morning in question, it hung on the screen like a confession, its timing too precise to ignore. The expert elaborated, noting how this query suggested anticipation of medical scrutiny, a foresight that aligned with the toxin's subtle nature. Objections rang out from the defense, heated and repeated, but the judge's rulings held firm, the pattern too compelling to exclude. For the first time in the trial, Emily's composure cracked visibly. She shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting in her lap, a nervous flush creeping up her neck. Jurors watched in silence, the room's energy electric. As this entry capped the montage, a damning echo of planning that bridged research to reality. The prosecution paused, letting the impact resonate, the screen's glow a spotlight on undeniable intent. Yet, even as nervousness gripped Emily, the prosecution held back their strongest card, the text messages waiting in the wings like a shadow ready to fall. The expert stepped down, his testimony a cornerstone that fortified the case, leaving the jury with a clear vision of steps taken in secrecy. Emily's attorney prepared for cross-examination, aiming to cast doubt on interpretations, but the search's raw words lingered, their timestamps an unassailable timeline. The courtroom recessed briefly, murmurs filling the air as attendees processed the digital revelations, reporters rushing to file updates on this turning point. Emily sat quietly, her earlier whispers silenced, the weight of her own history pressing down in ways she hadn't anticipated. The trial's rhythm pulsed forward, each piece building toward inevitable confrontations. Cross-examination began with the defense probing the expert on data recovery limitations, suggesting possible tampering or misattribution. The witness rebutted calmly, detailing safeguards and verifications that upheld the evidence's integrity. Jurors followed the exchange closely, questions revealing their engagement with the technical nuances. Emily watched intently, her nervousness tempered by moments of resolve. But the search's shadow loomed large, their content a persistent echo. The judge intervened sparingly, ensuring fairness as the defense sought to humanize the queries, perhaps youthful curiosity or unrelated research. Yet the expert's responses reinforced the pattern's specificity, tying it inexorably to the events. This back and forth added depth, the courtroom an arena where science met scrutiny, each answer strengthening the prosecution's foundation. As the session wore on, the search's impact rippled outward, influencing how jurors viewed prior testimonies, the coffee's preparation now seen through a lens of premeditation. Emily's visible unease became a subtle undercurrent, noticed by those in the gallery, her fidgeting a contrast to the trial's early days. Reporters noted it in dispatches, the narrative shifting toward a young woman facing the consequences of her digital footprints. The prosecution, sensing the momentum, prepared to layer on more. Made the text messages a looming reveal that promised to amplify the search's weight. The room's tension built steadily, each objection and ruling a step in the unfolding drama, as evidence continued to mount against lingering doubts. The expert's final clarifications addressed defense hypotheticals, dismissing them with data-backed logic that left little ambiguity. Jurors' expressions showed absorption, the pattern of planning, research, and execution now etched in their minds. On Emily's nervousness persisted, a quiet admission that the facade was cracking under the barrage. The judge called for a break, his gavel a punctuation to the intensity, allowing brief respite before the trial resumed. Whispers filled the halls, discussions of the search's chilling progression dominating conversations. Emily conferred with her team, her voice low, the earlier poise giving way to strategy amid the revelations. Resuming, the prosecution reiterated key entries, ensuring the jury grasped their alignment with the timeline, a seamless flow from query to act. The defense pushed back, but the evidence's clarity held, the searches a digital confession too patterned to refute. Emily's gaze returned to the screen occasionally, her nervousness a subtle thread weaving through the proceedings. The chapter of digital exposure drew toward its close, but the final blow simmered, the texts ready to deliver emotional depth. The courtroom, alive with focused energy, anticipated the next layer, the search's echo resonating long after the projections dimmed. In quieter reflections during lulls, jurors pondered the human element, how online explorations could lead to real-world choices, the search's a mirror to hidden intents. Emily's visible shift marked a mini-climax, her nervousness a harbinger of vulnerabilities exposed. The prosecution, poised and strategic, held the texts in reserve, their content a promise of further unraveling. The trial's narrative deepened, each revelation a building block toward clarity and consequence. The day's end approached with the expert excused, the search's impact a lasting imprint on the room. Emily sat composed but changed, the nervousness a quiet undercurrent amid the legal tide. Reporters filed out, stories of digital trails captivating audiences as the case edged closer to its emotional core. The judge adjourned, his watchful presence guiding the process, ensuring justice's steady path. Yet the stage was set for more, the texts, with their raw words, waiting to strike the final note in this crescendo of proof. Emily's nervousness lingered as a visual echo, the search's pattern an unshakable foundation. The courtroom cleared, but the tension remained, a prelude to revelations that would test defenses further. Chapter 13. Betrayal in Texts. The courtroom's tension reached a fever pitch as the prosecution shifted focus to the recovered text messages from Emily's phone, their words projected onto the large screen for all to see. The digital forensics expert returned briefly to authenticate the data, explaining how deleted conversations were pieced back together through backups and logs, ensuring every line was verifiable. Jurors sat in rapt attention, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and unease. As the first messages appeared, innocent at first, casual vents about family rules, and curfews. But as the scroll continued, the tone darkened, revealing a young woman's growing frustration with her father's strict oversight. Emily stared at the table, her earlier nervousness now etched into a rigid posture, avoiding the screen where her own thoughts were laid bare. The room grew profoundly quiet, the weight of personal betrayal hanging like a veil over the proceedings. As the expert read select passages aloud, his voice steady and neutral. One early message set the stage. "Dad's always on my case about everything. It's like he owns my life." Sent to a close friend weeks before the incident, it drew sympathetic replies, but Emily's responses escalated, painting Mark as an obstacle to her freedom. The prosecution highlighted these exchanges, tying them to the timeline of arguments over finances and independence, in showing how resentment built like a slow-burning fire. Jurors followed along, some jotting notes, while others exchanged subtle glances, the human element of the case coming into sharper focus. Emily's attorney whispered reassurances, but her gaze remained fixed downward, the faint flush of discomfort visible on her cheeks. The messages unfolded like chapters in a private diary, each one a step deeper into a mindset where complaints morphed into something more pointed. The courtroom absorbing the shift with a collective breath held in anticipation. As the projection advanced, the text took on a sharper edge, with Emily describing her father's rules as chains I need to break. The friend responded with caution, suggesting talks or compromises, but Emily's replies pushed back, laced with hints of defiance that now echoed ominously in the legal setting. Prosecutors paused on key lines, letting them linger on the screen, their simplicity belying the underlying tension. One juror adjusted her glasses, leaning closer, while another wiped a subtle tear, the emotional pull of a daughter's words against her father striking a chord. Emily shifted slightly in her seat, her hands clasped tightly under the table, a quiet sign that the public airing of her private vents was chipping away at her resolve. The expert continued, his narration weaving the messages into the broader evidence, showing how they aligned with digital searches and the chemical's arrival, creating a narrative of growing intent. Deeper into the conversation, messages celebrated the idea of escape. "Once he's not controlling everything, I'll finally be free." The words hung on the screen, their optimism now twisted into something foreboding, drawing murmurs from the gallery. The prosecution emphasized the timing, placed amid escalating family disputes, but a direct link to motive that no objection could fully deflect. Emily's attorney rose, arguing the texts were mere exaggerations of youthful frustration, not proof of action, but the judge overruled, allowing the full context to stand. A juror in the front row dabbed at her eyes, the raw emotion of betrayal resonating deeply, as the room felt the sting of words that once seemed harmless. Emily stared resolutely at the table, her breathing steady, but her posture betraying a tension that hadn't been there before, the weight of her own expressions turning against her in this arena of judgment. Revenge threaded through later texts, subtle at first, but building. "He thinks he can ruin my plans. Wait until I turn it around." The friend replied with concern, urging calm, but Emily's responses doubled down, hinting at solutions without specifics. Prosecutors read these aloud, their voices measured, letting the implications sink in without added drama. Jurors' faces showed a mix of sorrow and resolve, one wiping away tears as the display highlighted celebrations of potential freedom. Life without his rules will be amazing. Emily's gaze flickered briefly to the screen, then back down, her nervousness manifesting in a slight tremor of her hands. The gallery stirred faintly, whispers of shock circulating as the messages painted a portrait of calculation hidden behind casual chats. The expert clarified deletions, showing attempts to erase them, but recovery tools had preserved the trail, turning private rants into public evidence. The prosecution built momentum, projecting a cluster of messages that crescendoed toward the incident. Found a way to make things easier, no one will suspect. The vagueness, once protective, now stood as a damning clue, tied to the chemical's online order. Jurors leaned in, absorbing the progression from complaint to veiled plan, made their empathy for the family evident in softened expressions. One juror, overcome, reached for a tissue, tears welling as the texts celebrated independence at any cost. Emily's attorney objected, claiming interpretive bias, but the judge permitted it, noting the jury's discernment. Emily remained focused on the table, her earlier whispers to counsel silenced, the emotional barrage wearing on her composure. The room's hush deepened, the betrayal in her words echoing like a quiet storm, bridging digital events to real-world consequences. Climaxing the display, a final message stunned the courtroom. Soon, he'll see what it's like to lose control. Read aloud, it hung in the air, its menace subtle, yet profound, drawing a collective intake of breath. The prosecution paused, letting it resonate, before tying it to the morning's events. A calculated step toward reclaiming power. Jurors' reactions varied, tears from one, stern nods from others, as the text's cumulative impact settled. Emily stared downward, her face pale, the nervousness now a visible strain in her tightened jaw. The gallery murmured softly, the human tragedy unfolding in pixels and phrases. Prosecutors ended with a simple, resounding statement. This was not an accident. This was a calculated attempt to endanger a father for personal gain. The words landed like a gavel, the room absorbing their finality as the evidence's weight pressed inexorably forward. Defense arguments followed, but they faltered under the onslaught, the attorney attempting to reframe the texts as emotional outbursts without action. He highlighted youthful impulsivity, suggesting overinterpretation, but his delivery lacked the earlier vigor, resignation creeping into his tone. Jurors listened politely, but faces showed skepticism, the message's clarity undermining alternative narratives. Emily's lawyer glanced at her, his expression one of quiet acceptance, as objections grew fewer. The case's momentum too strong to redirect. The courtroom felt the shift, the defense's efforts collapsing like a house of cards against the solid wall of proof. Even Emily seemed to sense it, her stare fixed on the table, the earlier hints of confidence eroded by the relentless revelations. Prosecutors sat back, their case fortified, as the trial edged toward its decisive phase. Closing statements wrapped the day's intensity, the prosecution reiterating the text's role in exposing motive, on a betrayal captured in casual words. The defense pleaded for doubt, emphasizing Emily's age and the lack of direct observation, but the arguments rang hollow, the lawyer's resignation evident in subdued delivery. Jurors filed out for deliberation, their faces thoughtful, carrying the weight of messages that had stirred tears and convictions. The courtroom emptied slowly, whispers of the text's impact filling the halls, reporters rushing to capture the emotional climax. Emily remained seated, her nervousness a quiet undercurrent as deputies prepared to escort her. The judge adjourned, his gavel a punctuation to the charged session, leaving the room in anticipation of the jury's return. Deliberations began behind closed doors, jurors reviewing notes and evidence, the texts a focal point in discussions. Hours passed, but the process moved swiftly, consensus building around the pattern of planning and betrayal. Less than 6 hours in, a note emerged. They had reached a decision. The courtroom reconvened, benches filling once more with a buzz of expectation. Emily sat straighter, her hands clasped, a mix of nervousness and resolve in her eyes. Family members held their breath, the air thick with the promise of resolution. Reporters positioned themselves, ready to relay the outcome as the jury filed back in, their faces composed but telling. The foreperson stood, the room holding its collective breath, because justice was about to speak, its voice poised to echo through the hall and beyond. The foreperson's words came clear and steady, announcing the verdict on each count, the culmination of days of testimony and evidence. Gasps punctuated the reading, the room's energy electric as the decision settled. Emily's face froze, her nervousness giving way to a stark realization, while across the aisle, Mark and Sarah exchanged glances of quiet relief mixed with sorrow. The judge thanked the jury, scheduling sentencing promptly. But allowed time for impact statements, setting the stage for final emotional reckonings. The courtroom's hush lingered, the verdict a turning point that shifted the narrative from trial to consequence, justice's path now clear. In the aftermath, discussions swirled, jurors later sharing how the text's raw emotion swayed their views, tears in the deliberation room mirroring those in court. Emily's defense team huddled, preparing appeals, but the lawyer's resigned demeanor spoke volumes. Arguments that once held promise now overshadowed. The gallery dispersed, whispers of the quick deliberation circulating, a testament to the evidence's strength. Prosecutors nodded in quiet satisfaction, their simple closing statement resonating as a fitting end to the climax. The room emptied, but the betrayal in those texts echoed, a lasting imprint on all who witnessed. Family reflections deepened outside, Mark grappling with the words that revealed his daughter's inner world, a Sarah torn between love and loss. The verdict's swiftness underscored the case's clarity, justice moving with deliberate speed. Emily, escorted away, carried the weight of the decision, her nervousness evolving into quiet contemplation. Reporters filed stories of the emotional peak, the texts a highlight in narratives of family fractures. The judges' chambers buzzed with post-verdict formalities, the courtroom's energy dissipating into the evening. Yet the text's impact endured, a climax that bridged evidence and emotion, paving the way for sentencing's finality. Jurors departed with a sense of duty fulfilled, their tears a human thread in the legal tapestry. As night fell, the case's echoes lingered in homes and headlines, the betrayal in texts, a reminder of hidden depths. The quick deliberation, under 6 hours, marked efficiency born of compelling proof, justice's voice resounding clearly. The courtroom, now silent, awaited the next chapter, its walls holding the memory of words that changed everything. Chapter 14. The verdict. The courtroom reconvened with a palpable sense of finality, the air thick with anticipation as jurors filed back into their seats, their expressions a careful mask of solemnity. The judge nodded for order, his gavel resting nearby, while Emily sat at the defense table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Across the aisle, Mark and Sarah held each other's hands, their faces drawn from the emotional marathon of the trial, bracing for the words that would define the path ahead. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, capturing the moment's gravity for stories that would soon spread far beyond these walls. The foreperson rose slowly, unfolding a sheet of paper, her voice steady as she addressed the room. Every eye fixed on her, the hush so complete that even the faint rustle of fabric seemed amplified. This was the culmination of days filled with evidence and emotion, a decision that would echo through the lives of everyone involved, sealing the narrative of trust shattered and consequences faced. On the count of attempted murder, the foreperson began, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. We find the defendant guilty. Gasps rippled through the gallery, a collective exhale of shock and relief mingling in the air. Emily's face froze, her eyes widening slightly as the reality pierced her composed exterior, the faint remnants of her earlier confidence dissolving in an instant. The foreperson continued without pause, her tone unwavering. On the count of poisoning, guilty. On the count of aggravated assault, guilty. Each declaration landed with increasing weight, the room absorbing the verdicts like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of reaction across faces. Jurors nodded subtly, affirming their consensus, while the defense attorney bowed his head, a quiet acceptance settling over him. Emily's hands trembled faintly under the table, her breath catching as the full scope of the decision washed over her, the untouchable aura she had carried now crumbling under the jury's unanimous voice. Across the courtroom, Mark lowered his head, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs that spoke of a father's profound sorrow rather than triumph. Sarah gripped his arm, tears streaming down her face. The verdict a bittersweet affirmation of justice amid the ruins of their family. The gallery murmured softly, some wiping eyes, others exchanging nods of agreement, the emotional undercurrent swelling as the foreperson concluded her reading. The judge thanked the jury for their service, his voice measured and respectful, acknowledging the gravity of their task in a case that had delved so deeply into personal betrayals. Emily sat motionless, her frozen expression a stark contrast to the lively whispers she had shared with her lawyer throughout the trial. The smirk that had defined her presence now vanished completely, replaced by a blank stare that hinted at the storm raging within. The room's energy shifted, the verdicts hanging like a resolved cord, paving the way for the next steps in a process that had exposed hidden resentments to the light of scrutiny. The judge wasted no time, scheduling sentencing for the immediate future. His announcement met with a nod from both sides as they prepared for the final phase. But before delving into punishment, he allowed for victim impact statements, inviting those affected to speak from the heart. The courtroom settled into an expectant quiet, the air charged with the promise of raw emotion as Mark slowly rose from his seat, supported by Sarah, his steps measured toward the podium. Reporters adjusted their positions, sensing the poignancy of the moment, while jurors watched with empathetic eyes, the verdicts fresh in their minds. Emily lifted her gaze for the first time since the reading, meeting her father's eyes across the divide, a flicker of something, regret, defiance, or fear, crossing her features. The judge prompted gently, ensuring the space for words that could bridge or widen the chasm opened by the trial's revelations. Mark approached the podium with deliberate care, his voice trembling at first but gaining strength as he addressed the room, his eyes locking onto Emily's. "I loved you more than anything," he said, the words carrying the weight of years spent nurturing and guiding, now laced with the pain of betrayal. The courtroom fell into absolute silence, every listener drawn into the intimacy of a father's heartbreak, his hands gripping the stand for support. He spoke of the mornings shared, the dreams he held for her future, and the trust that had been the foundation of their bond, now fractured by choices he struggled to comprehend. Tears welled in his eyes, but his gaze remained steady, conveying not anger, but a profound sadness that resonated through the space. Jurors listened intently, some dabbing at their own eyes, the human element piercing the legal formality, as Mark's words painted a vivid picture of love, tested and wounded. Emily stared forward, her expression unreadable. But the room felt the impact of Mark's testimony, his voice echoing with quiet power that left no corner untouched. He described the hospital days, the fear of losing everything, and the lingering questions of why, questions that lingered like shadows in his heart. Sarah wept softly beside him, her presence a silent pillar, as Mark concluded with a plea for understanding, not just for himself, but for the daughter he still loved, despite the chasm between them. The silence that followed was profound, the courtroom holding its breath, absorbing the depth of emotion that transcended verdicts and evidence. The judge nodded respectfully, allowing the moment to settle before moving forward, his own demeanor softened by the raw humanity on display. Reporters captured the essence in hurried notes, knowing this statement would humanize the headlines, a father's words a poignant counterpoint to the trial's clinical proofs. With the impact statements concluded, the judge turned to procedural matters, confirming the sentencing date and outlining expectations for both sides. The verdicts stood as a testament to the jury's careful deliberation, their quick consensus a reflection of the evidence's overwhelming clarity, from digital trails to chemical matches. Emily was escorted out, her steps measured, the frozen expression lingering as a mask over whatever turmoil brewed within. Family members lingered in the halls, exchanging hugs and quiet words, on the emotional release of the verdicts mingling with the anticipation of what came next. Jurors departed with a sense of closure, their role fulfilled in a case that had demanded both intellect and empathy, the guilty findings a balance struck between facts and feelings. The courtroom emptied gradually, echoes of the day's gravity fading into the corridors as preparations for sentencing began in earnest. Outside, media clustered, yet their reports framing the verdicts as a swift affirmation of justice in a story of domestic discord. Community reactions varied. Some expressed relief at accountability, others sorrow for a family torn asunder. But the consensus leaned toward the evidence's irrefutability. Mark and Sarah returned home, the weight of the day heavy on their shoulders, finding solace in small comforts amid the ongoing healing. Emily, in her holding area, processed the outcomes in solitude, as the frozen face giving way to private reflections on paths taken and consequences met. The judge reviewed notes in chambers, ensuring the process's integrity, his scheduling of immediate sentencing a nod to the case's emotional urgency. The verdicts, now etched into record, marked a turning point, shifting focus from proof to penalty, with Mark's words a lingering echo of love's endurance. Legal teams huddled post-verdict, prosecutors reviewing statements for sentencing arguments, while the defense pondered mitigation strategies. The courtroom staff tidied the space, resetting for the next phase, the air still humming with the day's intensity. Jurors, released from duty, shared quiet conversations about the case's impact, the guilty decisions, a collective stand for accountability. Emily's frozen reaction replayed in minds, a visual of shock amid the trial's climax, her Smirks' absence, a subtle victory for the process. Family friends offered support via messages, their words a balm for wounds that verdicts alone couldn't heal. The judge's immediate scheduling underscored the case's gravity, ensuring closure without undue delay as the narrative edged toward its final resolutions. In quieter moments, reflections on the verdicts deepened, how evidence had woven a tapestry too tight for doubt, leading to guilty on all counts. Mark's statement, with its trembling honesty, stood as a highlight, silencing the room and humanizing the legal machinery. But Emily's face, frozen in the moment, became a symbol of realization dawning, the verdicts stripping away illusions of untouchability. Sarah found strength in community outreach, groups for families in similar straits offering guidance. The courtroom, now silent, held memories of the four persons reading, each guilty a step toward mending what was broken. Reporters filed comprehensive pieces, balancing facts with the emotional undercurrents. The case a cautionary tale of hidden resentments surfacing. The scheduling of sentencing brought a sense of inevitability, the judge's decision reflecting the trial's efficient pace. Prosecutors prepared briefs emphasizing the verdict's implications, while defense sought leniency based on youth and context. Jurors returned to daily lives, carrying the experience as a reminder of justice's role in society. Emily's time in holding allowed for introspection, the frozen expression thawing into quiet acceptance or resolve. Mark and Sarah discussed next steps, their bond strengthened by adversity, focusing on recovery beyond the courtroom. The verdict's echo lingered in public discourse, forums debating the outcomes, but the consensus affirmed the jury's thoroughness. As evening fell, the courtroom building stood quiet, its halls empty save for custodians, the day's drama a chapter closed. The guilty findings on attempted murder, poisoning, and aggravated assault marked justice served, a balance restored amid chaos. Mark's words, leaving the room silent, resonated as a father's enduring voice, bridging pain with hope. Emily's frozen face captured the verdict's impact, a moment of clarity in the storm. The judge retired for the night, his mind on the impending sentencing, ensuring fairness in every step. Family dynamics, forever altered, began the slow process of rebuilding, the verdicts a foundation for moving forward. Legal analysts reviewed the case online, praising the jury's swift yet considered verdicts, a model of deliberation. Community support groups reached out to the Carters, offering resources for healing. Emily's defense team filed preliminary motions, but the guilty across counts left limited avenues. The courtroom's silence contrasted the day's intensity, a pause before sentencing's finality. Jurors reflected privately, some journaling the experience, the emotional statements, a lasting impression. Mark and Sarah shared a quiet meal, discussing forgiveness's complexities, the verdicts a step toward closure. The four persons reading replayed in memories, each guilty an affirmation of evidence over doubt. Emily, in her cell, contemplated the path ahead, the frozen moment a turning point. The judge's scheduling ensured prompt resolution, honoring the case's emotional toll. Reporters' articles circulated, capturing the verdict's drama, and with Mark's statement, a poignant highlight. The gallery's reactions, tears, nods, underscored the human stakes, justice not abstract, but deeply personal. In the broader scope, the verdict sparked conversations on family pressures and accountability, a story that transcended the courtroom. Emily's face, frozen in shock, symbolized the collision of actions and consequences. Mark's quiet cries echoed the cost, a father's love enduring amid grief. The judge prepared for sentencing, his role pivotal in balancing mercy with justice. Jurors found peace in their decision, the guilty verdicts a duty fulfilled. As the chapter of verdicts closed, the courtroom's legacy endured, a space where truths emerged and balances were struck. The scheduling of immediate sentencing promised swift closure, with Mark's silencing words a bridge to the final act. Emily's frozen expression lingered as a visual echo, the Smirks' complete vanishing, a quiet triumph for accountability. The room, now at rest, awaited the gavel's next fall, justice's voice resounding in the hearts of all touched by the case. Chapter 15. 85 years. The courtroom settled into a profound stillness as the verdicts echoed in the minds of everyone present, the weight of guilty on all counts hanging like a final curtain drawn over the trial's intense drama. Mark Carter rose slowly from his seat, his movements deliberate, supported by Sarah's gentle hand on his arm as he made his way to the podium. The room watched in hushed reverence, the air thick with the unspoken emotions that had built throughout the proceedings. He adjusted the microphone slightly, his breathing steady, but his eyes glistening with the depth of a father's enduring love and unimaginable pain. Emily sat across from him, her gaze fixed forward, unblinking, as if steeling herself against the words to come. The judge nodded for him to begin, ensuring this moment of raw humanity could unfold without interruption, a space carved out for healing amid the legal finality. Mark cleared his throat, his voice starting soft but gaining clarity, addressing not just the court, but the daughter who had once been the center of his world, now separated by choices that had shattered their bond irreparably. "I loved you more than anything," Mark began, his words trembling at the edges but carrying a quiet strength that filled the room, drawing every listener into the intimacy of his heartbreak. He spoke of the years spent watching her grow, from her first steps to school achievements, each memory a thread in the tapestry of their family life now frayed by betrayal. The courtroom absorbed his narrative, Jurors reflecting on the evidence that had led to this point, while reporters noted the poignant contrast to the cold calculations presented in testimonies. Emily stared ahead, her expression unchanging, but the subtle tension in her posture hinted at the internal storm his words stirred. Mark continued, recounting the morning of the incident not as an accusation but as a loss, the trust in a simple cup of coffee, the collapse that followed, and the hospital days where fear of the unknown gripped him. His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on, emphasizing the love that had always guided his strictness, meant to protect rather than confine, but now twisted into something he could scarcely comprehend. "But you tried to erase me," Mark said, his voice dropping to a whisper that nonetheless carried through the silent space, the phrase landing with the force of a revelation that silenced any remaining murmurs. He described the lingering effects on his health, the oxygen tubes and medications that had become part of his daily routine, symbols of a wound that went beyond the physical. The jury listened intently, some nodding in quiet empathy, recalling the forensic details that had confirmed the deliberate nature of the act. Emily remained motionless, her eyes locked on a point beyond him, refusing to meet his gaze, as if the weight of his words formed an invisible barrier she dared not cross. Mark spoke of the family home, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now shadowed by doubt and absence, his plea not for vengeance, but for understanding the choices that led here. So the room felt the depth of his sorrow, a father's love clashing with the reality of harm intended, creating a poignant tension that underscored the human cost behind the legal proceedings. Emily stared forward without speaking, her silence a stark presence in the room, amplifying the emotional void between them as Mark concluded his statement. He stepped back from the podium, his shoulders slumping slightly under the release of pent-up words, Sarah rising to meet him with a supportive embrace that spoke volumes of their shared resilience. The judge allowed a moment for the impact to settle, his own expression softened by the raw honesty displayed, before turning to the matter of sentencing. Prosecutors stood ready, their briefs outlining the case's severity, while the defense prepared one last appeal for leniency, citing youth and potential for reform. The gallery shifted subtly, whispers of anticipation circulating. As reporters captured the scene's gravity, knowing this father's address would resonate in stories of justice tempered by personal loss. Emily's unchanging stare lingered as a quiet enigma, her lack of response a final note in the symphony of familial fracture. Then the judge delivered the sentence, his voice clear and authoritative, cutting through the charged atmosphere with the precision of long-considered judgment. 85 years in prison, he announced, the number echoing like a thunderclap, drawing sharp gasps from the room as the reality sank in. Emily's eyes widened briefly, a flicker of shock piercing her stoic facade, while Mark closed his eyes, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over him. The judge elaborated, explaining the decision's rationale with measured detail. The extended term reflecting the premeditated nature of the act, the vulnerability of the victim, and the profound breach of trust inherent in harming a family member. Our prosecutors nodded in affirmation, their case's strength validated, as the defense sat in resigned silence, the appeal for mercy overshadowed by the evidence's weight. The gallery buzzed faintly, the sentence's severity a topic for immediate discussion, but the judge maintained order, ensuring the moment's gravity remained undisturbed. Gasps filled the room as the full implications of the 85 years settled, a term that promised a lifetime behind bars for someone so young, underscoring the court's view of the crime's gravity. Emily's hands clenched in her lap, her breath quickening, the untouchable confidence that had defined her throughout the trial now fracturing under the sentence's finality. Mark and Sarah exchanged a glance, their tears a blend of closure and enduring grief, the years ahead a path to rebuild without the shadow of uncertainty. Jurors watched quietly, their verdicts now culminating in this decisive outcome, on a balance struck between compassion and accountability. The judge continued his explanation, detailing how the sentence accounted for multiple counts, merged where appropriate, but extended to reflect the overall harm and lack of mitigating factors. Reporters scribbled furiously, the number 85 becoming a headline anchor, symbolizing justice's reach in a case that had captivated with its intimate betrayals. The judge explained the decision clearly, his words methodical, yet infused with the case's human elements, emphasizing how the evidence demonstrated not just an act, but a series of choices marked by calculation and indifference. He referenced the digital trails, the chemicals' deliberate use, and the psychological evaluations that highlighted a profound lack of remorse, factors that warranted a sentence reflecting both punishment and protection for society. Emily listened, her head bowed slightly for the first time, and the reality of decades in confinement sinking in like a slow tide. The courtroom absorbed his rationale, jurors affirming with subtle nods, the logic aligning with their own deliberations. Prosecutors felt a quiet vindication, their pursuit of truth rewarded, while the defense prepared for appeals, though the judge's clarity left little ambiguity. The gallery reflected on the explanation, whispers acknowledging the balance of severity with fairness, and the sentence a measured response to cruelty uncovered. Emily Carter had believed she was untouchable, a mindset woven through her actions and demeanor, from the smirks in court to the hidden plans executed in secrecy. But the law had reached her, its grasp firm and unyielding, dismantling the illusions of invincibility that had guided her choices. As the judge concluded, deputies approached, their movements professional yet poignant, signaling the transition from trial to consequence. Emily stood slowly, her eyes darting briefly to her parents, a mix of defiance and dawning fear in her expression. The room watched in silence, the sentence's finality marking the end of a chapter that had exposed hidden resentments to unforgiving light. Mark wiped his eyes, his heart heavy with the complexity of love persisting amid justice served, while Sarah offered a quiet prayer for healing in the years to come. The courtroom's hush deepened, the moment a culmination of evidence, emotion, and equity. As deputies placed handcuffs on her wrists, the courtroom heard the sound of metal closing, a sharp click that reverberated like a period at the end of a long sentence, symbolizing the closure of freedom once taken for granted. Emily's shoulders tensed, the cold steel a tangible reminder of the path her decisions had forged, her earlier poise giving way to a visible tremor. The gallery observed quietly, some with satisfaction at accountability, and others with sorrow for a young life redirected so harshly. Jurors reflected on their role, the verdicts now embodied in this transfer of custody, a duty that weighed heavily but felt just. The judge oversaw the process with impartial eyes, ensuring dignity in the proceedings' conclusion. Mark and Sarah watched, their hearts aching, the sound a poignant echo of bonds severed and rebuilt in new forms. Reporters noted the detail, its symbolism ripe for narratives of justice's tangible reach. For the first time since the trial began, Emily Carter looked afraid, her eyes widening as the reality of 85 years loomed, stripping away the layers of denial and bravado that had shielded her. The smirk that had punctuated courtroom moments was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that humanized her in this final instant. A young woman facing the consequences of choices made in shadows. The room felt the shift, a collective empathy mingling with the satisfaction of resolution, as deputies guided her toward the exit. Jurors exchanged glances, their decisions affirmed in this visible transformation, the trial's arc completing with poetic irony. Mark's earlier words echoed in the silence, a father's love contrasting the fear now evident, bridging the divide with enduring complexity. The gallery stirred faintly, whispers of the moment's impact circulating as the scene etched itself into memories of justice served. The gavel struck once, its sharp report signaling the end of the session and the formal closure of a case that had unraveled a family's hidden fractures. The judge's final words thanked all involved, his tone reflecting the proceeding's gravity, before adjourning with a nod to the enduring pursuit of fairness. Emily was led away, the door closing behind her with a soft thud, the sound a subtle punctuation to the day's events. Mark and Sarah rose slowly, embracing amid tears. On the sentence, a step toward healing, though the road ahead remained long. Jurors departed with a sense of fulfillment, their contributions to accountability a quiet pride. The courtroom emptied, echoes of the gavel lingering, as outside the world continued, touched by the story's ripples. Reporters dispersed to file reports, the 85 years a stark headline, symbolizing the law's unyielding stance. Justice had spoken, its voice resolute in the face of betrayal, and affirming that no one stands above the consequences of their actions. The sentence, explained with clarity, stood as a testament to the trial's thoroughness, balancing the scales tipped by planning and harm. Emily's fear, glimpsed in that unguarded moment, humanized the outcome, a reminder that behind every case lies a web of emotions and choices. Mark and Sarah stepped into the hallway, supported by friends, their path forward one of gradual mending. The judge retired to chambers, reviewing the day's notes, satisfied with the process's integrity. Jurors reflected on the journey, the gavel strike a release from their duties, carrying lessons of empathy and evidence. The courtroom, now silent, held the memory of justice delivered, a space where truths prevailed. And the smirk that started this story disappeared forever, erased by the cumulative force of evidence, emotion, and equity, leaving in its place the stark reality of accountability. Emily's transformation, from confident detachment to visible fear, marked the trial's poetic closure, a visual echo of illusions shattered. The 85 years loomed as a lifetime's reflection, a sentence born of cruelty confronted. Mark's words lingered as a beacon of love's persistence, guiding the family toward uncertain but hopeful horizons. The gallery's gasps faded into history, the case a cautionary tale etched in public consciousness. Prosecutors packed their files, their work a bridge to safer tomorrows, while the defense pondered appeals amid acceptance. The gavel's echo resonated, justice's final note in a symphony of revelation and resolution. In the days following, reflections deepened, communities discussing the balance of mercy and consequence, the sentence a topic of debate, but ultimately affirmation. Mark and Sarah sought counseling, rebuilding step by step, their bond a testament to resilience. Emily, in her new reality, faced the weight of time, and opportunities for growth amid confinement. Jurors returned to lives enriched by the experience, carrying insights into human complexities. The judge moved to other cases, the trial a highlight of principled adjudication. Reporters' stories evolved, focusing on themes of family and forgiveness, the 85 years a symbol of boundaries enforced. The courtroom stood ready for new stories, its role in society's fabric unchanging. The poetic justice of the closure settled like dusk, the Smirks' disappearance a fitting end to a tale of hubris met with humility. Mark's trembling address and Emily's fear wove the final threads, a narrative complete in its emotional arcs. The law's reach, clear and firm, reaffirmed trust in the system, while personal healings began in quiet corners. The gasps and silences of the room became memories, the sentence a milestone in lives forever altered. Justice, spoken through verdicts and gavel, left an indelible mark, a story concluded but lessons enduring. As time moved forward, the case faded from headlines but lingered in hearts, a reminder that untouchability is an illusion dispelled by truth. Emily's path, now defined by years of reflection, held potential for change amid accountability. Mark and Sarah found new rhythms, their love an anchor in turbulent seas. Jurors occasionally revisited the experience, proud of their part in fairness. The judge's explanation echoed in legal discussions, a model of reasoned sentencing. The metal's closing sound, the gavel's strike, these became symbols of closure, justice's voice resounding eternally. The smirk, once an emblem of arrogance, vanished into the annals, replaced by the enduring light of resolution and hope.